Her name is Cecilia Whitmore. She's 45 years old. She's wearing silk and pearls that cost more than most people's cars. She is sitting in her home study, and her posture is the posture of a woman who was taught from childhood in an upper-crust home that how you carry yourself in public is a form of dignity that nobody can take from you. Her hair is swept back. Her jaw is set, and she is holding a folded piece of paper so tightly that her knuckles have gone white. That paper is a DNA result, and it is about to blow up 20 years of lies, grief, and one woman's very carefully constructed revenge, and as it turns out, a secret buried inside the Whitmore family itself that nobody was supposed to find, ever. But secrets don't stay buried. They just wait for the right person to come along and start pulling at threads. And Cecilia Whitmore's daughter, the one who lived, is exactly that kind of person. Stay with me. Because this story starts long before that DNA kit. It starts with a family so wealthy, so polished, and so picture-perfect on the surface that nobody ever thought to ask what the picture was hiding until everything cracked open. And once it did, nothing would ever close again. Let's go back, just far enough to understand exactly who these people are and why the things that happen to them matter as much as they do. The Whitmores are old money. And when people say old money in Charleston, South Carolina, they are not talking about someone's grandfather who did well in real estate. They are talking about the kind of family whose name is on hospital wings, whose portrait hangs in the lobby of a university building, whose great-great-grandparents are referenced in history books, with complicated footnotes, because Charleston history always has complicated footnotes. The Whitmore family built their original fortune before the Civil War. The specifics of how are, historically speaking, uncomfortable, and various Whitmore descendants across the generations have handled that discomfort in various ways, some by quietly endowing scholarships, some by building community centers, and some, in the earlier generations, by simply not acknowledging it at all. What matters for this story is what the Whitmores became in the modern era, Whitmore Capital. A private investment firm founded in 1961 by Carter's great-grandfather, Carter Harrison Whitmore, and grown through generations into something that manages assets most people couldn't count without a calculator. Carter H. Whitmore IV is the latest iteration. He is tall, dark-haired, broad across the shoulders, in the way of men who played college lacrosse and never fully stopped. He has a square jaw, really blue eyes, and the particular brand of confidence that comes from growing up knowing that the world will generally accommodate you, not arrogance exactly, but an ease. A baseline assumption that problems are solvable if you apply the right resources. He's not perfect, but he is a good man, and that matters. He's a man who made some terrible choices, which is, if we're being honest, the most human combination there is. He married Cecilia Tate when he was 23 and she was 22. They met at a charity event in Atlanta. She was there representing a gallery she worked for. He was there because his mother had made attendance non-negotiable. He approached her by commenting on a piece of art she was studying. She turned toward him and told him, with remarkable confidence, that his interpretation was incorrect, and here was why. He asked for her number before she finished the sentence. Cecilia Tate is from Atlanta. She is African-American, brilliant, and the daughter of the Honorable retired Judge Leonard Tate and his wife Gloria, who founded an education nonprofit in 1987 that is still running and still doing good work today. Cecilia grew up in a house where excellence was expected and mediocrity was gently but firmly not tolerated. He has her mother's cheekbones, her father's directness, and a laugh that has the specific quality of something that cannot be faked. Together, they looked like a magazine cover. Their wedding was featured in Charleston Living. Their restored antebellum estate had 7 bedrooms, a vast garden Cecilia redesigned herself, and a large library with original editions, because Carter loved books. It made the cover of the magazine the following year. They were by every visible measure the it couple, and for a while. They absolutely were. The first 4 years of their marriage were genuinely good, not just TV good, but the kind of good that comes from two people who are individually complete and choosing to build something together with real intention. Carter worked for his father at Whitmore Capital. Cecilia built an art consulting practice that had nothing to do with her husband's money and everything to do with her own eye, her own instincts, and her own willingness to cold call galleries until people took her seriously. She was very good at it. They traveled, Italy, Greece, Japan, a disastrous 3 days in Iceland that they still laugh about. They argued the way two strong-willed, intelligent people argue, loudly, fairly, and with the genuine belief that the other person's point was worth engaging with even when it was wrong. They had a dog named Bourbon, whom they both adored completely. They were partners, real ones. In the second year of their marriage, Cecilia became pregnant for the first time. It was not planned, but it was welcomed, joyfully, completely, in the particular way of two people who had not yet spoken aloud about children but discover, when the moment arrives, that they were always headed there. For 7 months, the Whitmore house changed. Softer somehow, fuller. Carter read books about fatherhood with the focused intensity he normally reserved for quarterly earnings reports. Cecilia painted a small mural on the wall of what would become the nursery, pale yellows and soft creams, and stood back and thought, yes, this is the next thing. At 8 months, they lost the baby. There is no clean way to say that. There was no warning. There was a routine appointment, and then there was a sound on the monitor that was wrong, and then there was the specific, terrible quiet of a room full of medical professionals who have run out of things to do. Carter was in the parking lot when his phone rang. He dropped his keys twice before he got the door open. The grief that followed was total. Cecilia's body had carried this child for 8 months. 8 months is long enough to feel movement, to know a rhythm, to begin, in the deep cellular way of mothers, to recognize a presence. That presence was gone, and what it left behind was something that didn't have a name in any language Cecilia had been raised to use. She went quiet, not completely. Not visibly, to the outside world. She returned to work within 6 weeks because staying home felt worse. She attended dinners and openings and charity events, and said the right things and wore the right clothes, and was, to anyone looking, Cecilia Whitmore, composed, striking, entirely in command of herself. But Carter knew. Carter slept next to her and sat across from her at dinner and watched her look past him when he spoke, not rudely, not deliberately, but in the way of someone whose attention has been permanently redirected inward to grief too large to share. She stopped reaching for him at night. She stopped asking about his day with the genuine curiosity she had always had. She was present in all the ways that could be counted and gone in every way that mattered. He tried. He tried in the ways he knew how, which were the ways of a man raised in a household where feelings were managed rather than named. He booked the Iceland trip they'd always talked about. He brought her coffee exactly the way she liked it, every morning, without being asked. He sat beside her on the back porch in the evenings and didn't speak because he sensed she didn't want words. He held her when she let him. What he could not do, what he did not know how to do, was reach her where she actually was. And so the distance between them grew, not dramatically, not with arguments or coldness or any of the visible signs of a marriage in trouble. It grew the way a crack in a foundation grows, invisibly, steadily, until the weight of everything built on top of it becomes the problem. It was in this season, the long, muted season of Cecilia's grief and Carter's helplessness, that a woman named Diane Prescott joined Whitmore Capital as a strategic consultant. If you were building a villain from scratch, you would probably make her obvious, cold-eyed, calculating in a way that announced itself. The kind of person rooms went quiet around. Diane Prescott was not that. She was 32, white, exceptionally beautiful with long auburn hair and an easy laugh and the specific social gift of making every person she talked to feel like the most interesting person in the room. She was excellent with numbers, exceptional with clients, and extraordinarily good at reading people. She read Carter Whitmore very quickly. She saw a man who was carrying grief he hadn't been given permission to name. A man who was watching his wife disappear behind her own loss and didn't know how to follow her there. A man who needed badly to feel capable again, to feel seen, chosen, necessary. A man who was, in other words, exactly the kind of man who was vulnerable to exactly the kind of attention she was skilled at providing. She was patient about it. She didn't rush. Coffee after late meetings. A text checking in on a difficult week. Dinner after a deal closed. Small, careful, incremental things. Diane Prescott was many things, but impulsive was not one of them. By the time Carter understood what was happening, he was already in it. The affair lasted 14 months. Here is the thing about Diane Prescott that is important to understand before we go any further. She was not a woman who got into this casually. She had convinced herself, and this is the particular tragedy and horror of the kind of person Diane was, that what she and Carter had was real, that he was going to leave, that she was not a mistress but a destination, that the story was going to end with Carter choosing her and the Whitmore name and all that came with it. Carter did not see it that way. Carter saw a mistake he was making in real time and couldn't stop and felt terrible about it and was going to have to eventually account for. In the third year of their marriage, something shifted. Cecilia began to surface. Slowly, unevenly, not healed but moving, she started talking to Carter again, really talking the way she used to. She started touching his arm when she passed him in the kitchen. She started coming back. And then she found out she was pregnant again. She took the test on a Tuesday morning and sat on the edge of the bathtub for a long time looking at the positive result with equal parts joy and dread. In the afternoon, she drove herself to the hospital for confirmation. She sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes before she called Carter to tell him. Carter answered on the first ring, and when she told him, the sound he made was not quite a word. It was the sound of a man remembering, in an instant, exactly what he had and what it had cost him and what it would still cost him. That evening when workers had left for the day, Carter called Diane into his office and told her it was over. He did not tell her why. He ended it the only way he knew how, abruptly, badly, without the full truth. He said only that it had to stop, that it should have stopped long before now, that he was sorry. The argument that followed was not short. Diane demanded to know what had changed. He gave her nothing useful. She pressed harder. His voice stayed controlled in the way of a man who has decided that composure is the only thing left he can offer. She told him this was cowardice, that he had made promises, implicit ones at least, and that she had reorganized her life around what she believed they were building. Carter said, "There is nothing we are building. There is nothing there. I'm sorry." She told him, very quietly, that he would regret this. He said he already did. He did not know she meant it literally. A week later, he had her fired from her position at Whitmore Capital. He told himself it was necessary, that her presence in the building was a constant reminder of what he'd done, that he owed Cecilia a clean environment, that it was the only way forward. He wasn't wrong about any of that. But it meant that Diane Prescott, who had already absorbed being discarded without explanation, now walked out of that building with a banker's box and a severance agreement and no remaining access to the life she had built her plans around. It was only after she was out, in the weeks that followed, that she learned through a contact still inside the firm why Carter had ended things so suddenly. Cecilia was pregnant. Diane sat with that information for a long time. She had not been replaced. She had been discarded for a pregnancy. She had been the thing Carter used to survive his grief and his distance and his failing marriage, and now that the marriage was recovering, now that Cecilia was back, now that there was a child coming, she had simply been removed, like a problem that had been solved. She was not a woman who accepted that framing. She was not a woman who accepted it at all. She had, at that point, 6 weeks before Cecilia Whitmore's due date, and she began to plan. Several months after learning the reason she had been discarded, Diane drove through the night to Atlanta. She arrived at Sandra Morgan's house at 5 in the morning. Sandra was a woman who had, as Diane had thoroughly researched, desperately wanted a child for over a decade and never been able to have one. Sandra was not a bad person. She was a lonely one and a trusting one, and Diane had spent 3 weeks cultivating both of those qualities with the specific focus of a woman who was very good at reading people and had decided to use that gift in the worst possible way. She'd told Sandra the baby's biological mother had willingly given her up, that the father was a powerful man who didn't want the arrangement publicized, that everything was legal and documented. She put a folder on the table and a check on top of it. Sandra held the baby, who was healthy and small and alert, and had absolutely no idea that her entire life was being decided at this moment, opened her eyes. Sandra named her Elise. She did not know that was already her name. Now here is something that wasn't in any official report, something that only came out much, much later, piece by piece, through investigations and interviews, and the slow, grinding work of people who refused to stop pulling at threads. 6 weeks before Cecilia Whitmore went into labor, Diane Prescott made some phone calls. The first was to a man named Gerald Holt, the brother of a night nurse at Mercy General Hospital named Beverly Holt. Gerald ran a small construction firm in Savannah. He had a gambling problem, 2 outstanding loans with people who were not patient about repayment, and a debt to Diane Prescott that predated all of it. Here is how that debt existed. 2 years prior, Diane had discovered, entirely by accident, through a document that crossed her desk during a routine audit at Whitmore Capital, that Gerald Holt had been running a low-level invoice fraud scheme through a subcontractor the firm used for building maintenance. Small amounts, consistent, the kind of thing designed to avoid detection, and it had avoided detection right up until Diane caught it. She had not reported it. She had photographed every document. She had filed it away. And now, 6 weeks before October 14th, 2004, she called Gerald Holt and told him it was time to settle his debt. Not with money, with access to his sister Beverly, the night nurse. Diane needed Beverly's cooperation on one specific night, and she needed Gerald to make that happen. Gerald, who was genuinely terrified of both Diane and the people he owed money to, called Beverly. Beverly said no. Immediately, emphatically no. Gerald explained what Diane had on him. What it would mean for him if it came out. What would happen to the family? He was not proud of the conversation. He cried during parts of it. Beverly said she needed time. She took 3 days, and then she called Gerald back and said she would meet with Diane. They met at a diner outside Charleston on a Thursday afternoon. Beverly Holt was 41 at the time. She was a careful woman, professional, 12 years of nursing, no disciplinary record, well regarded at Mercy General. She sat across from Diane Prescott in a corner booth and folded her hands on the table and did not touch her coffee. Diane had dressed casually for this meeting, jeans, a simple blouse, because she understood that the blazer and briefcase version of herself would put Beverly on the defensive. She told Beverly a story. The story was this. There was a child about to be born, twins, actually, and the father of those children was a powerful man who had made very serious promises to Diane. Promises of a life together, promises he had now broken by choosing to stay with his wife, and Diane was not going to let that go without consequence. Not asking you to hurt anyone, Diane said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. The Barbies will both be perfectly healthy. All I need is for one of them to disappear. Quietly, she'll be cared for, she'll have a good life, she'll just not be with them. Beverly stared at her, talking about taking someone's child. Talking about a man who destroyed my life, facing a fraction of what he took from me. And I'm talking about your brother's freedom, or the lack of it. Beverly shook her head. I could lose my license, I could go to prison, only if someone finds out. Diane reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table. Beverly didn't open it, she didn't need to, and they won't find out, because the paperwork will be clean, because the one other person who needs to know has already been handled. Beverly looked up. Who? Diane looked at her steadily. The Obgyn, the hard part is handled, all you have to do is make the switch. Doctor, Rachel Calloway was the kind of woman who, on the surface, appeared to have nothing to hide. She's 53 years old, respected Obgyn, 12 years at Mercy General, published research, a genuine reputation for patient care, but Diane Prescott was very good at finding the thing underneath the surface. She had found it through a contact at the South Carolina Medical Board, a man named Philip Drew who had, years earlier, quietly buried a complaint filed against Calloway. The complaint was old, it was complicated, and it was the kind of thing that, if it ever saw daylight, would end Rachel Calloway's career immediately and completely in 1998. A patient of Calloway's had filed a grievance alleging that Calloway had administered medication during a delivery without properly disclosing the risks, medication that the patient later believed had contributed to complications that left her unable to have any more children. The investigation had been opened, and then, quietly, through a process that was not technically illegal but was thoroughly improper, it had been closed. Philip Drew had made that happen. And Philip Drew had done Diane a favor once before and considered them even. Diane disagreed. She had documentation of his role in the buried complaint, and she had made that very clear to him when she needed the Calloway file. So when Diane approached Dr. Calloway, not at the hospital, not in any official capacity, but at a conference in Columbia where Calloway was presenting a paper, she had come prepared. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Calloway's hands shook throughout. Diane laid it out plainly. The buried complaint, the patient who never got justice, the medical board contact who would not, if this came to light, be able to protect Calloway a second time. The press, which in the age of the emerging internet was increasingly interested in medical misconduct stories. I'm not a cruel person, Diane told her. I'm a thorough one. What I'm asking you to do is very simple. Sign the documentation I'll provide. Tell the family there was a complication. Genuinely sorry about it, and you will be Rachel because you are actually a decent human being, and then live your life, Calloway said. And if I refuse, Diane looked at her with genuine patience, then the complaint gets refiled with evidence this time, evidence that includes documentation of how it was closed the first time. She picked up her coffee. Your call. Calloway sat in silence. She thought about the patient, about what had happened, about the guilt she had carried for 6 years. She told herself later that she had agreed partly because Diane had told her the family had consented, that this was a private adoption that simply needed a discreet medical framework. She told herself she'd believed it. She had believed it enough to do it. That is not the same thing. What do I have to say? Calloway asked finally. Diane reached into her bag and pulled out a typed document. Exactly what's on page 2, she said. October 14 th. 2004 Cecilia Whitmore went into labor at 2 in the morning, 3 weeks early. Carter drove her to Mercy General with one hand on the wheel and one hand on hers, and a very specific expression of focused terror that he was trying to disguise as calm. The labor was fast, and it was complicated in the way that twin deliveries often are intense, overlapping, demanding on everyone in the room. Beverly Holt was on duty. She had requested that shift specifically 2 weeks prior, citing a scheduling conflict with another nurse who had been grateful for the swap. Aria came first. 5 pounds 4 ounces, screaming, the kind of immediate, full-lunged cry that makes everyone in the delivery room exhale. Carter laughed. Cecilia wept. Aria was placed on Cecilia's chest, and Cecilia said her name out loud for the first time, and it was perfect. Elise came second. 4 pounds 11 ounces. Quiet but alive. Pink, breathing. She was small and a little slow to find her voice, but her Apgars were 7 and 8, and this is the truth it took 20 years to surface. She was not unresponsive. Beverly Holt was at the warmer. She looked at the monitor, then at Calloway. She said, "Sats dropping, I'm taking her to the table." It was a lie. The Sats were fine. But in the controlled chaos of a twin delivery, with one crying baby on Cecilia's chest and monitors beeping, nobody questioned the nurse with 12 years on the floor. Beverly pulled the curtain. 10 minutes, that's all it took. On one side of the curtain, Carter and Cecilia waited. On the other, Beverly wrapped a healthy, quiet baby girl in a clean blanket and slipped through the staff door to the stairwell, where Diane Prescott waited in a dark coat. Dr. Calloway walked to the bedside. Her face was composed, her eyes weren't. "I'm so sorry," she said. "We lost her, she was stillborn." Cecilia made a sound. There is no word for the sound a mother makes when she is told her child is gone. It is not a scream, and it is not a sob, and it is not silence. It is all three at once, and it is the sound that stayed in Dr. Calloway's chest for the next 20 years like something calcified. Carter pulled Cecilia close. His face was buried in her hair. His shoulders were shaking. Diane had sourced a deceased infant through a corrupt contact at the county morgue, and that is the baby Beverly brought to Cecilia and her husband. The paperwork was clean, the room was quiet, and somewhere, in the stairwell of Mercy General Hospital, a living baby girl was handed to a woman in a dark coat and driven into the night. Grief in a wealthy family looks different from the outside. What is the same always is what it looks like from the inside. The funeral for Elise Grace Whitmore was held 1 week after her birth. Private, by the standards of the Whitmore family, which still meant 80 people, because there is no such thing as a small private gathering when your name is on a boulevard. White roses and gardenias, because those were Cecilia's choices, and nobody argued with Cecilia about flowers. Carter's mother, Elena Whitmore, sat in the front row in black lace and cried in absolute silence, which Cecilia had always found deeply unsettling. Sympathy cards came from senators, from governors, from the CEO of a Fortune 100 company who had known the senior Whitmores since the 1970s. None of it touched the actual thing. Cecilia threw herself into Aria, fiercely. With a protectiveness that she would later describe, honestly, in therapy, years down the road, as slightly desperate. She nursed her, held her, sang to her, and woke up 3 times a night, not because Aria required it, but because she was terrified, in the deep, unreasonable way of new mothers who have lost a child, of what sleep might allow to slip away. Carter grieved differently. Carter got quiet. He went back to the office 2 weeks after the funeral. He stopped reading the parenting books. They were too full of sections about twins. He stopped crying in places where Cecilia could see him. He was present in all the ways that could be measured and absent in every way that counted. Cecilia noticed. She said nothing for 4 months, and then one evening at the dinner table over a meal that neither of them had really eaten, she said, "You're not here." Carter looked up from his phone. "I'm sitting right across from you. That's not what I mean, and you know it." He put the phone down. "Cecilia, I know you're hurting. I am too, but I need you here. Not the version of you that signs checks and shows up to meetings. You, the actual you." Carter sat with that for a long moment. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Neither do I," Cecilia said. "But we do it together or we don't do it at all." That night, Carter cried for the first time since the delivery room. Cecilia held him in the kitchen while the food went cold, and they were going to be okay, or at least, that's what they believed. What nobody tells you about grief is that it doesn't always bring people together. Sometimes it just makes visible the cracks that were already there. And then a few weeks later, Cecilia found the hotel receipt. It was not dramatic in the way it happened. It was tucked in the pocket of a jacket she had pulled from the dry cleaning pile on a Saturday morning. A receipt from a hotel in Colombia, a date that didn't match any trip she'd been told about, a room number. She stood in the hallway for a long time holding it. She already knew. The way you know something your mind has been protecting you from knowing. She already knew before she asked. The conversation that followed was the worst of their marriage. Carter told her the truth, all of it. The timing of it, how it had started, how it had ended, why. He did not minimize it or reframe it. He sat in front of his wife and was honest in the particular devastating way of a man who has stopped trying to manage his own image. Cecilia listened to everything. Then she said, "I want her gone." "I already fired her weeks ago," Carter replied. And both of them made the same mistake. They assumed the chapter was closed. Aria grew into a bright, serious, curious toddler with Cecilia's eyes and Carter's stubborn streak, and an early aptitude for taking things apart to see how they worked. Life moves forward the way life insists on doing, not because you're ready, but because it simply won't wait. Carter and Cecilia went to couples therapy. 2 years of it. Dr. Howard Marsh, a therapist with a warm voice and a complete refusal to let either of them get away with deflection, became, for a while, the most important person in their marriage. It was hard work. The kind of hard that makes people quit. Cecilia had days when she looked at Carter across the dinner table and felt nothing but a clean, cold anger that had nowhere useful to go. Carter had days when the shame was so heavy he could barely hold eye contact with his own wife. Dr. Marsh sat between them through all of it and said, essentially, this is what the work looks like. Keep going. They kept going. They had Aria. And they had, underneath all the wreckage, something that was genuinely real. They had built something before the breaking, and what had been real before could be rebuilt into something more honest on the other side. By the time Aria was 8, the Whitmore marriage was, by any fair measure, stronger than it had been before the affair. Not repaired, rebuilt. Those are different things. Repaired is just covering a crack. Rebuilt is understanding why the crack happened and building the structure differently this time. Carter left the late nights behind. He was present, actually present, in the way he hadn't been before. Cecilia started talking about Elise, really talking, not around her or past her, but directly saying her name, telling Aria about her, letting the grief be real instead of managed. Dr. Marsh told them, at their final session, that they were functional and growing. Life settled into something that looked, finally, like peace. And here is where we need to slow down for a moment. Because while the Whitmore marriage was rebuilding, and while Elise Morgan was growing up in Atlanta, and while Diane Prescott was settling into her professional life, and her very tidy, very quiet idea of having one, something else was sitting in the Whitmore house that nobody was paying attention to. It was in the foundation, not the house's foundation. The family's, Elena Whitmore, Carter's mother, was a woman of great composure and very few confessions. She was 72, had managed the Whitmore family's social presence and charitable interests for 40 years, and wore black lace to funerals as a personal trademark. She had cried silently at Elise's funeral in the front row and said afterward only, "These things happen. The family moves forward." Cecilia had always found her difficult. Carter had always made excuses for her. There was a reason Elena was so contained about everything. There was a reason she had, over the years, quietly steered certain conversations in the family away from the firm's early history. A reason she had once, very pointedly, asked Carter to destroy a box of his grandfather Harrison's personal correspondence without reading it first. Carter had not destroyed the box. He had put it in storage. Because Carter Whitmore was, at his core, someone who did not like throwing things away. That box, sitting in a climate-controlled storage unit outside Charleston, contained letters. And those letters contained a secret that the Whitmore family had been protecting for 45 years. We will get to what's in them. But right now, we need to meet Aria. Because Aria is going to pull a thread that unravels far more than anyone bargained for. Aria Whitmore grew up knowing she had a twin who died at birth. Cecilia had told her when she was 5, carefully, simply with the blurry delivery room photograph in her hand. One grainy, precious image, 2 tiny faces, one crying, one still. Aria kept the photograph in a small silver frame on her desk all through school. She talked about Elise sometimes, not with performed sadness, but with genuine wonder. What would she have been like? Would we have been alike? By 20, Aria Whitmore was exactly what Cecilia had raised her to be. She was pre-med at the University of South Carolina, first in her class in biology. She had her mother's cheekbones and her father's height, and a laugh that filled rooms. She was kind in the specific way that only comes from being raised by people who worked very hard not to let their privilege make their child empty. She was also deeply, constitutionally curious. Which is why, when her best friend and roommate Brianna Cole, a young woman from Memphis with a true crime obsession and an evangelical commitment to genealogy kits, placed a DNA ancestry kit on the table in front of her for her 20th birthday, Aria did not roll her eyes and leave it in the box. "You just want someone to be obsessed about this with you," Aria said. "Obviously," Brianna said. "But also the Whitmore family history has got to be fascinating. Old Charleston money going back generations. Do the kit." Aria did the kit. She sent it off in January. She forgot about it during finals. She remembered it when the email arrived 6 weeks later. "Your results are ready." E. Morgan Aria almost didn't look at the extended DNA matches. She'd looked at the ethnicity breakdown, which reflected exactly what she'd expected, and was about to close the laptop when Brianna, who was leaning over her shoulder with a bowl of cereal, said the four most consequential words of the year. "Click the family matches." So Aria clicked. The familiar names came up first. A distant Whitmore cousin on her father's side, a second cousin of her mother's from Atlanta, expected names, expected relationships, and then one that wasn't expected. Close family, possible sibling or half-sibling. The profile name, E. Morgan. Aria stared. "Brianna," she said. "Yeah, what does possible sibling mean?" Brianna put down the cereal. She read the screen, she read it again. "It means the DNA is close enough to be a sibling, or sometimes a half-sibling, like from a parent with another relationship." She stopped. "Why, who is this?" Aria turned the laptop. Brianna read it. "That's not a half-sibling marker," Brianna said slowly. "That's a full sibling probability." Both of them were quiet. "My twin sister died at birth," Aria said. Brianna set the cereal bowl down on the desk and sat down on the bed. "Aria," she said carefully, "you need to message this person." Aria typed and deleted the message 4 times. The version she finally sent was short and honest and cost her more courage than she expected. She wrote, "Hi, my name is Aria Whitmore. We matched on this app as close family. I was told I'm an only child, so this match is confusing to me. I don't want to intrude on your life, but if you're open to connecting, I'd really like to understand this. No pressure at all." She sent it at 11:47 p.m. She did not sleep well. By Saturday, nothing. By the following Wednesday, she had almost convinced herself the account was inactive. Then, a week later, her phone buzzed. "Hi, Aria. I've been looking at your message for days now, trying to decide if I should reply. My name is Elise, and I think we need to talk." They called on a Friday night. Brianna went to the library with the deliberate tact of someone who understands the importance of a moment and chooses, for once, to not be in the middle of it. The call connected. Aria looked at the screen, and she felt the floor tilt under her. Because looking back at her was a face that was close to her own in the way that faces sharing blood sometimes are not identical, because they were fraternal, not mirrored, but related in a way that was unmistakable. The same jaw, the same particular set of the eyes, something in the forehead, something that said Whitmore to anyone who had ever seen a Whitmore. The girl on the screen was 20, dark brown skin, slightly lighter than Aria's, natural hair pulled back in a loose puff, a simple navy t-shirt. An apartment visible behind her that was small and tidy. She was gripping the edge of a table with one hand. She looked as terrified as Aria felt. "Hi," Aria said. "Hi," said the girl, a very long silence. "You look like me," Aria said. "I know, I've been staring at your profile picture for over a week, telling myself it was a coincidence. It's not a coincidence." The girl's voice was steady, but her eyes were very bright. "I think you might be my sister." Elise Morgan had grown up in Atlanta, Georgia. She was raised by a woman named Sandra Morgan, warm, firm, loving, the kind of mother who showed up to every school event and made her do her homework at the kitchen table and held her when she was sad without always needing to understand why. When Elise was old enough to ask about her origins, Sandra had told her, "Your birth mother couldn't keep you. She made an arrangement. I was chosen to raise you." Elise had lived with that story. It had felt thin in places, but the love around it had been real, and real love has a way of making thin stories feel like enough for a long time, until she was 20, until something in her shifted and she decided she needed to know. She did the DNA kit alone. She expected nothing specific. What she found was Aria. They talked for 3 hours that first night. At first it was careful, both of them circling the enormous thing in the center of the conversation without touching it directly. Small things, where they grew up, what they were studying, what they were like. Then Elise said, I need to ask you something directly. Ahead, Aria said, do you have a sister who died at birth? Aria's silence was its own answer. My twin, she said quietly. Her name was Elise. Girl on the screen closed her eyes. My name is Elise, she said, and I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, at Mercy General Hospital on October 14th, Aria's birthday. They both sat with that for a moment. There's something else, Elise said. Something my mom told me last year when I turned 20. She said she'd kept it until I was an adult. A breath. She said the woman who gave me to her, the woman who arranged everything, told her that I needed to disappear. Those were her exact words. The child needs to disappear. And she paid my mom to raise me and never, ever make contact with the Whitmore family. Aria's hands were very still. The Whitmore family, she said. Yes, I looked you up before I responded to you. I know who your father is. I know who your family is. And I think someone took me. I think someone arranged for me to be taken from my parents at 3 days old and placed somewhere else and told your family I was dead. Silence that followed was so complete that Aria could hear Brianna's music playing faintly from across the building. I think so too, Aria said. Then, I know who did it. She sent Elise a message after she hung up. A single text. Did Sandra ever tell you the name of the woman who arranged everything? Yes. She said her name was Diane Prescott. Aria searched the name immediately. Diane Prescott, former employee of Whitmore Capital, currently in Atlanta, Georgia, partner at a mid-size financial consulting group, LinkedIn profile, professional headshot, auburn hair going gray, a very pretty face with a composed smile. Aria studied that smile for a long time. Then she called Brianna. Need your help, she said. Brianna said, tell me what you need. Brianna Cole, a casual genealogy hobbyist, turned out to have the focused, methodical mind of a natural investigator when given a real problem to solve. Okay, she said, sitting cross-legged on the bed at 1 in the morning with a legal pad. Let's go through what we know for certain. She started writing. 1. The DNA match was too close to be anything other than a full biological sibling. 2. Elise was born on the same date at the same hospital. 3. Someone had told the Whitmore family she died. 4. Diane Prescott had arranged her placement with Sandra Morgan. 5. Diane Prescott had previously worked for Carter Whitmore and had Aria was careful here but honest, a personal relationship with him that had ended badly. Motive is obvious, Brianna said. Revenge, classic, but here's what I keep coming back to. She tapped the pen. She couldn't have done this alone. Had no medical access, no hospital credentials, which means she had help from inside Mercy General. At minimum, a doctor or a nurse, someone who was there that night. Attending OB was Dr. Rachel Calloway, Aria said. She was our family's doctor through the whole pregnancy. She's the one who told my parents Elise didn't survive. Brianna looked at her. So either Calloway was fooled or Calloway was involved. Yes. How do we find out which? We need documentation, Aria said. Before I tell my parents any of this, I need something real. My mother has carried the loss of Elise for 20 years. I'm not putting this in front of her without something solid. Her voice was very quiet but very steady. I need to go to Atlanta. I need to meet Elise in person, and I need to see whatever Sandra Morgan has. Brianna closed the legal pad. When do we leave? 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in Brianna's car, they drove 3.5 hours to Atlanta. Sandra Morgan's house was in a quiet Atlanta neighborhood, red brick, neatly kept, roses along the front walk that had been tended for years. She opened the door before they knocked. She had been watching the street. She knew, too, that this day would eventually come. She looked at Aria. Lord have mercy, no one will deny the family resemblance, Sandra said softly. She let them in, led the way to the kitchen, offered them coffee, and called up to Elise to come down. Then Sandra sat, hands wrapped around her mug, not drinking. Love my daughter, Sandra said first, before anything else. I have always loved her, and I need you to know that before anything else I say. Aria nodded, and Elise reached across the table and put her hand over Sandra's. The gesture was easy and old, a daughter and her mother. Tell me about Diane Prescott, Aria said. Sandra took a long breath, and she told them everything. The contact through a mutual acquaintance, the story Diane had told her, the check, the way Diane had arrived at 5 in the morning with a 3-day-old baby and a folder, and the specific calm of a woman who had already solved every objection Sandra might raise before Sandra raised them. She was very prepared, Sandra said. She had an answer for everything, and she stopped. I wanted to believe her, that's the honest truth. I wanted that baby so badly that I let myself believe. The paperwork she showed you, Aria said. Do Do you still have it? Sandra got up. She went to the filing cabinet in the hallway. She came back with a folder. Aria and Brianna leaned in together. The documents were impressive. Official seals, medical notations, dates that lined up. A relinquishment of parental rights that looked, to a layperson, completely legitimate. Aria found the signature line for the attending physician, Dr. Rachel Calloway. Mercy General Hospital, Charleston. SC Aria's hands were completely still. When the ground falls out from under you, sometimes the body just goes calm, like it's compensating. I need the whole folder, she said. Take it. Sandra said, I should have let it go a long time ago. They drove back to Columbia mostly in silence. An hour in, Brianna said, UK? No, not really, Aria said. Honest. What are you going to do? Aria watched the highway rolling out ahead. My mother lost a daughter 20 years ago, she said slowly. Stood at a grave. Cried on October 14th for 20 years. Named a dog after her, did you know that? Bourbon, our dog when I was little. Mom named him Bourbon because Elise's middle name was Grace and her favorite. She stopped. What I'm going to do is make sure every single person who participated in this answers for it. Completely. I don't care how long ago it happened. She looked down at the folder in her lap. But first, I need a lawyer. Before I go home, before I say a word to my parents, I need someone who can tell me that what we have is real and solid enough to take to the next step. Because when I walk into that house and tell my parents what I know, that is not a moment I can take back, and I will not do it with anything less than certainty. Whitmore's had retained the same law firm for 40 years. Aria did not call the Whitmore family lawyers. She called Marcus Webb, a man with a reputation in South Carolina for being the attorney that powerful families called when they had serious problems with other powerful people. He was Cecilia's second cousin's college roommate, which in the architecture of Southern black professional networks meant that Cecilia trusted him, even though Aria was calling without telling Cecilia why. They met in his Columbia office on a Tuesday. She brought the folder, the DNA screenshots, and the full chat history from her conversations with Elise. Marcus read everything, carefully, completely. He asked 2 questions during the entire review process, and at the end, he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose in the way of a man who had just confirmed something he was hoping wouldn't be confirmed. Aria, he said, if what this suggests is accurate, it is accurate. Then this is a criminal matter, falsification of official death records, medical fraud, kidnapping, depending on how the prosecution frames what Diane Prescott did. And if that signature belongs to Dr. Calloway, which a forensic examiner will tell us within a week, she is looking at the end of her career and possible criminal charges. I know, your parents need to be informed, immediately, I know, but I need to know first that what we have is solid enough. Before I go home, before I sit across from my mother, her voice caught, just once. Then it was steady again. I need to know it's real. Marcus studied her for a moment. You're 20 years old, he said. I'm aware. You're handling this very calmly for someone who just found out her deceased sister is alive. Fall apart later, Aria said. Right now I need to know if we have a case. Marcus looked at the folder again. We have a case, he said. A significant one. That night, Aria drove back to her dorm and sat in her car in the parking garage for 22 minutes. She allowed herself, in the privacy of that car, to shake. To cry hard, real crying, the kind that doesn't look clean. To think about her mother at the kitchen table when Aria was 5, holding that blurry photograph. You had a sister. Her name was Elise. She was loved, even if only for a moment. To think about her father, who cried in his study every October 14th, quietly enough that he thought no one could hear. She had heard. She had always heard. To think about Elise Morgan, 20 years old, in an Atlanta apartment, working a job and taking night classes and being a full, whole person who still did not know her name was supposed to be Whitmore. And then she thought about something else. Something that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the conversation with Marcus. A small thing he'd said, almost in passing, when he was going through the folder. He had looked at the Whitmore capital letterhead on a document Diane had apparently used to establish her credentials when approaching Sandra, and he had said, this firm goes back a long way. You know your family history? Some of it, Aria had said. There was a case in the 60s, early 70s, your grandfather's time. I came across it once in a different matter, never thought much of it. He'd handed the document back. Old money has long memories. Aria had noted it and moved on because she had more pressing things to track. But sitting in the garage now, she turned it over. Old money has long memories. She thought about Elena Whitmore, her grandmother, the woman who wore black lace, and cried without making a sound, who had asked Carter to destroy a box of Harrison Whitmore's personal correspondence without reading it, who had been ever since the news of the investigation began quietly circulating in the legal community, more tightly wound than usual. Aria wiped her face. She was going to deal with one thing at a time. She called her mother. "Hey, baby," Cecilia said, warm, easy, completely unaware. "How's studying?" "Good," Aria said. Her voice was perfectly level. "Mom, I need to come home this weekend. Is Dad going to be home?" "Sure. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine." "I just miss you both." "Miss you too. I'll make your father grill something." "That sounds perfect." She hung up. She sat in the dark, and she thought, everything is about to change. Every single thing. She was right, and she didn't even know yet how much. Aria left Columbia at 7 in the morning. She had barely slept. Not properly. She'd lain in bed going over how to say what she needed to say, the right order, the right words, whether to lead with the DNA results or lead with Elise's voice, whether to have Marcus on the phone or whether some things simply needed to be said between a daughter and her parents without legal counsel in the background. She'd called Brianna at midnight. "How do I do this?" she'd asked. "You just do it," Brianna said. "There's no version of this that isn't going to hurt. You just do it and then you hold on." That had been both completely useless and exactly right. Marcus had advised her to let him be present when she told her parents. Legal guidance on what came next. A buffer in case Carter or Cecilia, in the shock of the moment, said something that complicated things legally. Aria had told him she'd call him after. After, Marcus had repeated carefully. "They deserve to hear this from me," Aria said. "Not in a lawyer's office. Not with someone there to manage their reaction, me, their daughter, in their kitchen." Marcus had been quiet for a moment. "You're right, call me the moment it's done." So now Aria was on I-26 West, 2 hours from Charleston, watching the South Carolina landscape move past her windows. Flat country turning green, Spanish moss hanging heavy from live oaks, morning light turning gold over the marshes. The kind of morning that makes you feel like the world owes you something beautiful before it asks something hard of you. She thought about Elise. The Whitmore estate sat at the end of a long gravel drive lined with live oaks, whose roots had been growing in this specific soil for over 100 years. The house was white and wide and old in the specific way that Southern houses are old, not crumbling, not faded, but settled. Like it had made peace with everything that had happened inside it and decided to simply continue. Aria pulled up just before 9 in the morning. Her father's car was still in the drive. Carter had not gone to the office, which meant Cecilia had mentioned that Aria was coming home, and Carter had rearranged his day without being asked. That was the kind of father he was now, the kind who rearranged his schedule for his daughter's visits without anyone having to tell him he should. It had taken 20 years and one therapy odyssey and a lot of painful honesty to become that father. But he was. Aria sat in the car for a moment. She looked at the house, the white columns, the garden on the left side, where her mom had been replanting this week. She could see the fresh-turned soil from here, the neat rows of gardenia bushes along the fence. White, always gardenias. The front door opened. Cecilia stood in the doorway in a cream linen blouse and jeans, coffee cup in hand. She waved. The morning light was behind her, and she was silhouetted and beautiful, and she had absolutely no idea that everything was about to change. Aria waved back. Okay, she thought. Here we go. Carter had grilled salmon. Because Carter Whitmore had been told, "I'll make your father grill something," by his wife, and had taken it as a personal directive regardless of the fact that it was 9 in the morning, and salmon was not a breakfast food by any reasonable interpretation. So they ate salmon and scrambled eggs and the biscuits Cecilia had baked from scratch because her daughter was coming home, and that was reason enough to bake. They talked about school. About Brianna, who both of Aria's parents adored with the particular fondness reserved for the best friend who makes your child better. About a deal Carter was working on at the firm. About the garden renovation Cecilia was considering for the back terrace. Normal. And Aria sat across from these two people, her father cutting his salmon with the same deliberate precision he applied to everything, her mother laughing at something Aria had said, the morning light catching the pearls at Cecilia's collarbone, and thought, clearly and with a grief she was not expecting. After I say what I'm about to say, they will never have a morning like this again. Not exactly like this. Everything from this moment forward will be divided into before and after. She put down her fork. "I need to talk to you both about something," she said. Carter looked up from his plate. Cecilia's expression shifted, not quite to alarm, but to a specific, focused attention, the kind that parents develop for those particular words. Of course, Cecilia said. What's going on? Aria had rehearsed this. She had a whole framework. Start with the DNA kit, explain the match classification, walk through the probability numbers, lead them logically toward the conclusion so there was a structure in place before the shock hit. Controlled. Evidence first, build the case. She did not do any of that. What came out instead was, Elise is alive, words, one name. The silence that followed was the most complete thing Aria had ever been inside. It was like the house itself stopped breathing, like the morning light went flat. Like time had taken a step back to let the sentence land properly, Carter set his fork down very carefully. The specific movement of a man doing something with great deliberateness so that he does not have to feel his hands shake. Cecilia did not move at all. Her coffee cup was halfway to her lips, and it stayed there suspended for a full 3 seconds. What did you say? Cecilia asked, very quietly. Elise is alive, Aria said again. She lives in Atlanta. Her name is Elise Morgan. I've spoken to her, and I've met her in person, and I have DNA results and legal documentation and a lawyer who has reviewed all of it. Aria's voice was steady, and she was proud of herself for that. She didn't die. Someone took her. Someone arranged for her to disappear and paid the people involved to tell you she was gone. Cecilia put the coffee cup down. Carter said, Aria, Dad, listen to me first. Aria reached into the bag beside her chair and placed the folder on the table. The DNA printout on top, the documents beneath, the screenshots of her conversation with Elise's permission. I know what this sounds like, but I know what I'm saying. Please look at this before you say anything. Please just take a look. Carter picked up the DNA results first, because Carter was an investment man and data was how he processed the world. He understood probability tables. He knew what 99.97% meant. He read the sibling classification. He read it again. His face went through something complicated, skepticism first, the practiced skepticism of a man who has learned to verify before he believes, and then the skepticism ran out of room, because there was nowhere for these numbers to go except toward the truth. Cecilia had taken the folder. She was reading the hospital documentation, the relinquishment papers. The physician's signature line, Rachel Calloway, she said softly, not a question, a recognition. She was your OBGYN, Carter said, looking up. Yes, Cecilia said. She kept reading. She turned the next page. She stopped. She looked at a name on a line that Aria had highlighted in yellow, not for dramatic effect, but because Marcus had told her to mark the relevant sections so her parents could find them quickly. The name was on a line labeled, authorized by D. Prescott. Whitmore Capital Consulting Group. Cecilia went very still. Carter leaned across to see what she was looking at. He read the name. He read it again. He sat back in his chair. The color left his face the way water drains from a tipped container, fast, complete, leaving nothing behind. Carter, Cecilia said. Her voice had changed. It was no longer the warm voice of a Saturday morning. It was the voice of a woman who has just assembled a picture she does not yet fully trust, but cannot look away from. Carter, what is this? Carter opened his mouth. Nothing came out, Dad, Aria said carefully. I know about Diane Prescott. I know she had a personal relationship with you. That is not, she paused. That is not the part that matters right now. What matters is what she did. What she did, Cecilia repeated. The control in her voice was more frightening than anger would have been. What she did was take my daughter, Aria said, my daughter, who I was told died. Cecilia's voice cracked on the last word, just once, just barely, who I have grieved for 20 years, whose grave I have stood at, whose name I have said out loud on October 14th every single year. She stopped. She pressed both hands flat on the table, the gesture of a woman who is choosing deliberately not to shatter. Aria, she said, how certain are you? Completely certain, Mom. Marcus has reviewed everything. Marcus Webb? Yes, Cecilia nodded once. Then she looked at her husband, Carter Whitmore, who was worth more money than most people could count, who had run a firm through a financial crisis and rebuilt a marriage through its own kind of wreckage. Carter Whitmore looked, in that moment, like a man hit by something so enormous he couldn't yet feel it. The shock was too large for his body to have a proportional response. I'm sorry, he said. It was not entirely clear who he was saying it to. Cecilia went upstairs for 50 minutes. The sound that came through the ceiling was not crying. It was worse than crying. It was the specific sound of someone who has been carrying a grief for 20 years and just found out the grief was a lie. And the two things, the grief and the lie, are fighting each other for room inside the same chest. Aria sat at the kitchen table and didn't move. Carter stood at the kitchen window with his hands on the counter, looking at the garden for a very long time. When Cecilia came back downstairs, her eyes were red, but her face was composed, and she was holding her phone with both hands. She had called her mother. Gloria Tate, in Atlanta, had apparently received this information in the way that Gloria Tate received all significant information, by immediately shifting into the mode of a woman who has things to do and people to protect, and will do the falling apart quietly and privately at a time of her own choosing. Marcus, Cecilia said, sitting back down. Call Marcus. I want him here by this afternoon. Already texted him, Aria said. Cecilia looked at her daughter for a moment. The specific look of a parent who is seeing their child clearly, perhaps for the first time in a new way. Long have you been carrying this alone? Cecilia said. For 3 weeks, Aria said. I needed to be sure before I brought it to you. I needed it to be real. I wasn't going to do that to you if it turned out to be wrong. Cecilia reached across the table and put her hand over Aria's. They sat there in the kitchen of the house where Aria had grown up, the house where a nursery had been built for 2 Barbies, where one crib had eventually been disassembled and stored, where the October 14 THS had come and gone, and neither of them spoke for a while. Then Carter turned from the window. Tell me about her, he said. Tell me about Elise. Aria did. She told them everything. The DNA match. The first terrifying video call. Elise's voice, which was lower than Aria's and had an Atlanta cadence to it. The way she looked, the jaw, the eyes, the particular curve of the forehead that was so specifically Whitmore that Aria had spent the entire call trying not to stare. She told them about Sandra, about the Atlanta house, about the folder with Rachel Calloway's signature. She told them about Elise's life, the nursing classes, the medical clinic, the apartment, the fact that she liked gardenias. She mentioned that one carefully, watching her mother's face. Cecilia went very still when she heard it. Gardenias, Cecilia said. Her favorite flower, Aria said. She said she's always loved them. Cecilia looked at the window. Outside, along the garden fence, the gardenias she had replanted this week were young and new in their soil. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Carter was watching Cecilia's face. Then Cecilia said, very quietly, I planted gardenias the week she was born, in this garden, because I wanted her to be able to look out the window and see something I had grown for her. Nobody spoke. Then Carter, who had not cried since the previous October 14th, when he sat alone in his study and allowed himself the annual private space of that grief, sat down heavily in his chair and put his face in his hands. Cecilia got up and put her hand on his back. Aria looked out at the garden. Marcus Webb arrived at the Whitmore house at 2 in the afternoon. He came with his briefcase, his laptop, and in a manila folder tucked inside his bag, something he had not yet told Aria about. Something that had come across his desk 2 days prior and that he had spent 48 hours deciding how to handle. He sat in the living room across from Carter and Cecilia and laid out the legal landscape with the calm precision that made him very good at his job. The DNA results were unassailable. The hospital paperwork, if the signatures held up under forensic examination, which a document expert could confirm within days, represented fraud at the medical and governmental level. The financial connection between Diane Prescott and Beverly Holt was traceable. The case was solid. What are we talking about in terms of criminal liability? Carter asked. Significant. Falsification of official medical records. Filing a false death certificate, which incidentally means that legally Elise Whitmore does not exist. We will need to address that as a separate civil matter, child abandonment, and if we establish conspiracy, we are looking at multiple defendants. Dr. Calloway, Cecilia said, at minimum, and whoever else inside the hospital assisted with the physical transfer. Diane Prescott, Carter said, yes, her liability is complex to establish because she held no hospital credentials. But the paper trail connects her to the events of October 14th. Marcus tapped the folder. It's there. It's enough to open a formal investigation and, in my professional opinion, enough to bring charges. I want all of them prosecuted, Cecilia said. Every person who knew, every person who took money. I don't care how long it takes. Marcus nodded. Then he reached into his bag and took out the manila folder. There is something else, he said. And I need to tell you both about it before it becomes something you find out from someone else. Carter and Cecilia both looked at him. When I was reviewing the documents Aria brought me, specifically the Whitmore Capital letterhead that Diane used to establish her credentials with Sandra Morgan, I ran a standard background search on the firm's public filings. Routine, Something I always do. He opened the folder. I came across a reference to a legal case from 1971. A civil suit against Whitmore Capital, filed by a woman named Clara Mee Jessup. It was settled out of court. The settlement was sealed. Carter frowned. I've never heard of a case from 1971. No, Marcus said. You wouldn't have. It was your grandfather's time. Harrison Whitmore. Clara Mee Jessup was a woman from rural South Carolina. She was 23 years old in 1971. She filed a civil suit alleging that Harrison Whitmore had entered into a verbal agreement with her late father, an agreement that granted her family partial ownership interest in a specific parcel of land that was later absorbed into Whitmore Capital's real estate portfolio at the beginning of the firm's founding. The room was very quiet. The case was dismissed on procedural grounds, Marcus continued. Then refiled. Then settled, sealed, and as far as the public record is concerned, closed. What does this have to do with what's happening now? Carter asked carefully. On its own, possibly nothing, Marcus said. But when the Whitmore name went into the news cycle last week, even the small amount of circulation we've had so far, someone reached out to my office. A woman named Patricia Jessup. She says she is Clara Mee Jessup's granddaughter, and she says she has been waiting for the Whitmore name to be in public discourse for a very long time. Cecilia looked at Marcus. What does she want? She wants the sealed settlement record opened, Marcus said. She believes what her grandmother was paid in 1971 was a fraction of what the land was worth, and she believes Harrison Whitmore knew that when he negotiated the settlement. There's a box, Carter said slowly. Marcus looked at him. My grandfather's personal correspondence, Carter said. My mother asked me to destroy it years ago. I didn't. It's in storage. I think I need to open it. Cecilia looked at her husband. Marcus looked at them both. I think, Marcus said carefully, that you might want to do that before anyone else does. Carter drove to the storage unit alone the following morning. It was a climate-controlled facility 20 minutes outside Charleston, the kind of place where old money stores the things it doesn't want to display and doesn't want to discard. The box was in Unit 14, in the back, under two other boxes of financial records from the 1990s. It was a simple brown archival box with Harrison Whitmore's name on a label in his assistant's handwriting from 1979, the year Harrison died. Carter put it in his car and drove home. He and Cecilia opened it at the kitchen table. The letters were in manila envelopes, organized by year. Harrison's handwriting was clean and precise. A man who had written by hand all his life and treated the act with some formality. Most of the letters were business correspondence. Routine, the kind of documents that mattered in 1965 and were invisible in 2024. But near the bottom, in a separate envelope sealed with tape that had dried and cracked with age, was a set of documents that were not business correspondence. They were personal. Harrison Whitmore, in 3 letters written between 1968 and 1970, had written to a man named Robert Jessup, Clara Mee's father. The letters were careful in the way that letters written by lawyers' clients are careful, acknowledging the agreement, acknowledging that the land had been discussed, using language that was calibrated to imply good faith while committing to nothing legally binding. And then, in the final letter, dated March 1970, 1 year before Clara Mee filed her lawsuit, Harrison Whitmore wrote, in his clean, precise hand, I trust you understand that our arrangement, while conducted in the spirit of goodwill, was never formalized in a manner that would hold in any court of law. I have great respect for your family, Robert. I suggest we allow this matter to rest where it is. The alternative is not in anyone's interest. Carter read the letter 3 times. Cecilia read it once. He knew, she said quietly. Yes, Carter said. He knew the agreement was real and he buried it. Yes, this is why your mother wanted the box destroyed, Cecilia said. Yes, Carter, her voice was careful. This is not your fault. You didn't make your grandfather's choices, he said, but I'm the one sitting on top of them. He picked up his phone. He called Marcus. That same week, Carter received a phone call from his mother. Elena Whitmore was 72, and her calls were normally brief and purposeful. She was not a woman who called to chat. She called to convey information or extend invitations, or occasionally to deliver opinions that she characterized as observations. This call was different. Carter, she said without preamble, I heard from Margaret Holloway that the family has engaged Marcus Webb and that there is legal activity underway involving the firm's name. Yes, Mother, I understand there is. A young woman, name is Elise, Carter said, and she is my daughter, your granddaughter. I see, she said. Mother, Carter said, The box, Grandfather Harrison's box, I opened it. Another silence. Longer. Carter, I read the letters, all of them, including the one sent to Robert Jessup. Elena's breathing changed slightly, just slightly. That is old history, she said finally. It was settled. It was sealed, Carter said. That's not the same thing. Carter, I am asking you to, Mother. His voice was not unkind, but it was immovable. I have spent the last 2 weeks watching what happens to a family when someone decides that a secret is more important than a person. I'm not going to be that person. Not about this, not about anything. Elena was quiet for a very long time. Your grandfather was a complicated man, she said finally. I know, Carter said. So am I, but I'm trying to be less complicated about the parts that matter. He heard her exhale. I will speak to my attorney, Elena said. And she hung up. Carter sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. 3 days later, Elena's attorney called Marcus Webb's office. Elena Whitmore, it turned out, had known about the Jessup land arrangement since the 1980s, had known and had made the choice to let the sealed settlement stand, to protect the firm, to protect Harrison's legacy, to protect the name. She was not, her attorney conveyed carefully, prepared to contest any process Carter chose to pursue. She was not going to stand in the way. It was not an apology. With Elena Whitmore, it was as close as one was likely to get. Carter called Marcus and told him to prepare for one more conversation. Patricia Jessup came to Marcus Webb's office on a Wednesday. She was 44 years old, with her grandmother's cheekbones and the careful, precise posture of someone who has been preparing for a specific conversation for a long time and intends to have it exactly right. She had brought documentation, 40 years of it. Her grandmother Clara Mee's original filings from 1971. Photographs of the land in question, a 40-acre parcel in rural South Carolina that was now part of a commercial development that had been generating revenue for Whitmore Capital for 30 years. Her grandmother's own letters, written in the 1980s, describing what had happened. An appraisal from 2019 estimating the current value of the land and what a partial ownership stake would have been worth. She spread it all on Marcus's conference table methodically. Carter was there. He had asked to be. Patricia Jessup looked at him across the table for a moment before she sat down. I'm not here because of what happened to your family, she said. I'm here because of what happened to mine. I want to be clear about that. I understand, Carter said, and I want to be clear about something too. He placed Harrison's letter, the 1970 letter, the one with the line about the arrangement never being formalized, on the table beside her documents. I found this in my grandfather's personal correspondence. I'm giving you a copy today, and I am prepared to discuss what we owe your family. Patricia Jessup looked at the letter. She read it. She was quiet for a moment, then she looked at Carter. Your grandfather hoped my grandmother would let it rest, she said. Yes, Carter said. She didn't. You didn't either, and you were right not to. He paused. Tell me what you believe your family is owed. I want to hear it directly from you. Marcus Webb, sitting at the end of the table, made a note on his legal pad. Ray Fordham, the investigator who had been quietly building the financial threads of the Prescott case for weeks, sat in the corner with a notepad of his own. He was there not for the Jessup matter, but because Marcus had asked him to stay. The threads of this story, Fordham had said 2 days prior, have a way of connecting in directions nobody expects. He wanted to be in the room when they did. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Elise Morgan arrived in Charleston on a Saturday morning in April. Sandra drove her. They had discussed this, whether Sandra should come at all, whether her presence would make things complicated, whether Cecilia Whitmore would want the woman who had raised her stolen daughter sitting in her living room. In the end, Elise had made the call. Mom, I may be adopted, but that doesn't make you less of a mom to me, Elise said. We are going together. Plus that will give you a chance to smooth things over with my birth parents. That was the moment Sandra understood, without any remaining uncertainty, that this child she had raised was going to be absolutely fine. Sandra had known for 3 years. It had come to her slowly, the way the worst realizations do, not in a single moment, but in accumulation. A news article about medical fraud at a southern hospital. A name in the background of a story she almost scrolled past. The cold arithmetic of dates that she had never, in 20 years, allowed herself to add up. When Elise had told her about the DNA match in Aria Whitmore's message, Sandra had not been entirely surprised. She had been, if she was honest, waiting. The weight of what she had carried was not guilt exactly. She had been deceived, but it was not innocence either. She had wanted to believe because believing had been easier than the alternative. That was the part she had to account for. That was the part she intended to say out loud in that house to those people. Before this was over, they drove 4.5 hours. Elise watched South Carolina go by outside the window and thought about gardenias and DNA percentages and the way Aria's face looked on a video screen. Quiet, Sandra said. I'm processing, Elise said. Had months to process. There isn't enough time to process this, Elise said. Not before you have to do it. You just do it and then you process after. Sandra was quiet. That's very wise, she said. I learned it from you, Elise said, and despite everything she meant it. They pulled through the gate of the Whitmore estate just after 11. Elise looked at the house through the windshield. This is a lot of house, she said. Yes, it is, said Sandra. I grew up in a 3-bedroom bungalow. You did. I turned out great. Spectacular, actually. Elise nodded slowly. Then she opened the car door. Okay, she said. Let's do this. Cecilia Whitmore had promised herself she would be composed. She lasted approximately 4 seconds. The moment Elise came through the front door, tall, composed, natural hair out and full around her face, wearing a simple navy dress, moving with the specific quiet confidence of someone who has decided to walk into this moment on their own terms, Cecilia saw the jaw. She saw the eyes. She saw the thing that was Whitmore in the architecture of this young woman's face, and her chest simply opened. She crossed the hall in 4 steps. She pulled this stranger who was her daughter into her arms. Elise stiffened for just a moment, the instinct of someone not expecting to be held, and then her arms came up and she held on. They stood in the front hall of the Whitmore estate for a long time. Carter stood back. His jaw was working. He was losing the battle with his own composure, with the specific quiet dignity of a man who at least makes sure his composure falls apart neatly. Aria, standing at the edge of the hallway, pressed her fist against her mouth. Sandra Morgan stood at the door with her hands folded and her eyes bright, watching the thing she had known would eventually happen, the thing she had spent 20 years telling herself might never happen. She did not cry. It was very, very close. They sat in the living room for 3 hours. All of them, Cecilia, Carter, Aria, Elise, and Sandra, who was given a seat and told, in a tone from Cecilia that contained approximately 0 room for argument, that she would sit down. Elise talked about her life with the honest, direct clarity of someone who has decided that the full truth is the only version worth offering. She talked about Sandra's house, the kitchen table where homework was mandatory, the school events Sandra never missed, the terrible cooking that was made with great love. She was a good mother, Elise said. I want to be absolutely clear about that. She was strict and she loved me and I had a good life. I'm not here to erase that. Cecilia listened with the focused attention of a woman filing every detail away for permanent keeping. Carter asked questions, careful, genuine questions. About her nursing studies, about what she liked to do, about Atlanta. He asked with the specific attentiveness of someone who is trying to learn 20 years of a person in a single afternoon and knows that is impossible but intends to try anyway. Elise answered all of them. At one point, Elise laughed at something Aria said, a real laugh, unguarded, her head tilting back slightly, and Carter closed his eyes for just a second, because the laugh was Cecilia's, not an imitation. The actual laugh, inherited and carried 20 years in a different city, emerging in his living room like something that had always been there. Cecilia noticed him close his eyes. She reached over and put her hand on his arm. He covered it with his own. Later, Sandra asked to speak to Carter and Cecilia privately. Elise and Aria stepped out to the garden. They walked the replanted paths, and Elise asked what all the flowers were, and Aria named them, and they walked side by side in the April afternoon, and it was ordinary and easy and felt like something that had always been true and was only now getting the chance to be said out loud. Inside, Sandra addressed Carter and Cecilia directly. I made a terrible decision, she said. I was deceived, but I chose to be. I wanted that baby so badly that I let a story stand that I should have questioned. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. I am going to ask you to believe that I loved her and that I am sorry from the deepest place I have. Cecilia studied her for a long time. She is healthy, Cecilia said finally. She is happy. She is whole. That is partly because of you. That is because of her, Sandra said. Yes, but you gave her the environment. I despise the choice you made, Sandra. I want you to know that clearly. I will not pretend otherwise. A pause, but I will not take from Elise the mother she has known for 20 years. Not on top of everything else that was taken from her. Sandra exhaled slowly. Thank you, she said. Thank me, Cecilia said. I'm doing it for her. Ray Fordham arrived at the Whitmore house 2 days after Elise's visit. He was 62, with a gray beard and the manner of a man who had seen everything the state of South Carolina had to offer in terms of human behavior and had a very comprehensive filing system for all of it. He was the kind of investigator who presented findings the way a surgeon presents a diagnosis, calmly, precisely, without editorializing, because the facts were already sufficient. He sat in Carter's study. Carter and Cecilia on one side of the desk, Marcus on the phone on speaker. Ray opened his folder. Beverly Holt, he said, was currently living in a home in Savannah worth $2.4 million. Her documented income history as a nurse did not account for this. The purchase had been made in 2006 through a trust. The trust traced back to a shell company. The shell company was funded in 2005 through deposits from Prescott Consulting LLC, Diane Prescott's company. She paid the nurse, Cecilia said. That is the most supported interpretation, yes. There was more. A photograph found in Beverly Holt's semi-public Facebook account from a charity event in Savannah 4 months prior. Beverly Holt smiling at the camera. Standing 2 people to her left, not looking at the camera, a woman with auburn hair going gray at the temples. Diane Prescott and Beverly Holt were still in contact. The conspiracy was not a 20-year-old closed chapter. It was ongoing. Active. Marcus on the speakerphone said quietly, that changes the statute of limitations calculation significantly. Good, Cecilia said. I want the full picture in front of the DA's office by the end of the week. Already scheduled, Marcus said. Fordham closed his folder and looked at Carter. There is one more thing, he said, tangential to the Prescott matter, but I flagged it because Marcus asked me to keep my eyes open for anything touching the Whitmore name. He set a single sheet on the desk. The commercial development on the Jessup land parcel, the revenue it has generated over 30 years, the original valuation that was used in the 1971 settlement. The gap between those numbers is significant. I thought you should see the full picture before you sat across from Patricia Jessup. Carter picked up the sheet. He looked at the numbers. He nodded once. Thank you, he said. I already knew what I was going to do, but thank you. Beverly Holt called Diane on a Tuesday evening. She called from her cell phone, which her attorney had explicitly told her not to do. Fear makes people do what they have been told not to do. They know, Beverly said, when Diane picked up. Diane, they know. They have the documents. They have a DNA match. They have. Stop talking, Diane said. Her voice was completely calm. Diane, not call me again on this number, Diane said. Not on this number, not on any number. Get an attorney today. Do not speak to anyone without one. A pause. Are we going to be okay? Beverly asked. Diane did not answer that question. She hung up. She sat in her Buckhead living room in the specific, concentrated quiet of a woman who has built her entire self-image around being the most prepared person in any given situation, and is now doing the math on whether she still is. 20 years. She had had 20 years, she thought of Carter Whitmore. The way he had sat across from her in his office and told her, with the specific gentleness of a man who knows he is about to hurt someone, that it was over, that he was committed to his marriage. That he was sorry. She had sat in that chair and felt something happen inside her that she had never fully named. She had believed for 20 years that what she did was proportional. Sitting in her living room now, she began for the first time to have a different thought about that. She picked up her phone. She called her attorney. The leak came from inside Mercy General Hospital, not from the DA's office, which was careful, not from Marcus Webb's office, which was more careful still. It came from the records department, where 2 people had noticed that the 2004 delivery records for a patient named Cecilia Whitmore had been formally requisitioned as part of a legal proceeding, and where discretion had not entirely won out over the pull of an interesting story. The reporter at the Charleston Post, who received the tip, was careful and experienced. The story that ran was measured, no names yet, no specifics, but it was enough. Prominent Charleston family launches legal action after DNA testing reveals a 20-year-old deception surrounding infant's death at Mercy General Hospital. By noon it had been picked up by the Associated Press. By 4 in the afternoon it was on the cable news scroll. By the following morning, the Whitmore name was trending nationally. Elise Morgan, sitting in her Atlanta apartment, saw her own story on the news. It was a strange experience. She called Aria. I'm on the news, she said. I know, Aria said. Are you okay? Define okay. You still standing up? Yes, then you're okay enough. Carter had a draft statement prepared by the firm's PR team within 48 hours of the story breaking. Cecilia read it once and set it down. No, she said. Cecilia, this makes us sound like people who are asking to be left alone. We are not asking to be left alone. We are asking for accountability. She slid the paper back. Let me write it. She sat at the kitchen table for 45 minutes. She wrote one page. It said in Cecilia's exact voice that the family had uncovered evidence of a profound and deliberate deception carried out against them 20 years ago, that their daughter, who was alive and well, and had been reunited with her family, deserved justice, that they were cooperating fully with the district attorney's office, that they had confidence in the legal process, and that they had nothing further to say publicly until it had run its course. The final line was Cecilia's own addition. Marcus tried to advise against it. She looked at him in a way that ended the conversation. It said, "We are grateful our daughter is alive. We are certain that those responsible for this will be held to account." The statement ran everywhere. 3 journalists called Patricia Jessup's number within 2 days of the story breaking. She spoke to none of them. She was waiting. In the same week that Patricia Jessup sat down with Carter in Marcus Webb's office, 2 detectives from the DA's office paid a visit to Dr. Rachel Calloway's private practice in Charleston. Calloway was 63, 15 years in private practice. Well-reviewed, well-regarded, the kind of physician patients sent their sisters to. She had, for 20 years, carried something that never fully left. The detectives arrived at 4:30 on a Tuesday. Her receptionist knocked on the exam room door with the specific expression of someone delivering news they were not prepared for. Calloway came out. She saw the badges. She was very still for a moment, then she said, "Send them in." Her voice was steady. She had known, in a part of herself she had learned to keep very quiet, that this was always a possibility. She called her attorney before the detectives sat down. Smart. The interview lasted 2 hours. Calloway didn't confess, her attorney wouldn't allow it. But the answers she gave, careful, technically truthful, carefully not lying, told a very clear story to anyone listening with attention. She did not deny the signature. She did not deny knowing Diane Prescott. She said, unprompted, while her attorney was reading a document and not watching her mouth, "I want you to know that I was told the family had agreed. I was told." Her attorney touched her arm. She stopped. She had said exactly enough. Marcus brought the transcript of the Calloway interview to Cecilia that evening. Cecilia read it once. She set it on the coffee table. She was quiet for a moment. "She can be turned," Cecilia said. "That's the DA's read as well," Marcus said. "She was recruited not voluntarily. She was blackmailed. She made a catastrophically wrong decision, but she was operating inside a framework that Diane Prescott built for her." A pause. "That doesn't make her innocent. But it makes her the weakest link. And the weakest link is more useful as a witness than as a defendant. That is exactly the reasoning the DA is working through," Marcus said. "Good. A deal. Reduced charges in exchange for full testimony. I want Diane Prescott to be the primary target of this prosecution." Cecilia looked at Marcus steadily. "Calloway has been living with what she did for 20 years. You heard it in the transcript. She is not going to protect Diane Prescott." "Not now," Marcus nodded. "I'll convey the family's position to the DA's office." "It today," Cecilia said. The night before DA Grave announced the formal charges, Carter and Cecilia sat in the back garden. Cecilia's replanting had taken hold. The gardenias along the fence were small and new in the April soil, not yet blooming. "They will bloom in the summer." "She hated us," Carter said. "Not about the gardenias." "She hated what happened to her," Cecilia said. "People like Diane, they don't really see other people. They see the impact of other people on themselves. You were not a person to her. You were a thing she wanted, and then a wound she had to account for. I gave her a reason, Carter." Her voice was firm and gentle at the same time. "What you did to our marriage was wrong. It hurt me. It took years of real work to come back from. But what she did," she paused. "What she did was make a choice that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with power. Taking a child is not heartbreak. Heartbreak is what you and I went through. What she did was something else entirely." Carter was quiet for a moment. "And my grandfather's situation," he said. "The Jessup land, that's something else too," Cecilia said. "It is. I'm going to fix it," he said. "Whatever that looks like, whatever Patricia Jessup needs, I'm going to fix it." "I know," Cecilia said. "That's who you are now. That's the man you work to become." He looked at her. "I love you," he said. "I know," she said. "That was never the part in question." "And I love you too." They sat in the garden. The gardenias waited quietly in the ground. DA Pamela Grave held a press conference on a Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. Dr. Rachel Calloway, 2 counts of filing false medical documentation, 1 count of professional fraud. In exchange for full cooperation and complete testimony, she had received a significantly reduced charge profile. Her medical career was effectively over regardless. Beverly Holt, conspiracy, filing a false report, receipt of criminal proceeds. Her plea agreement had been finalized the week prior. Diane Prescott. The list was substantial. Conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of official state records, unlawful interference with parental rights, a charge that under South Carolina law carried serious weight, conspiracy to conceal, and based on the Atlanta DA's cooperation and the federal investigative team that had been reviewing the financial trail for 3 weeks, federal wire fraud, interstate movement of funds in furtherance of a fraud scheme, Diane Prescott was facing simultaneous state and federal prosecution. Her attorney released a statement. She denied all charges and looked forward to her day in court. The internet had many thoughts about this statement. Aria called Elise the moment the press conference ended. They filed, Aria said. Elise was quiet. All three, and federal charges on Prescott. How do you feel? Aria asked. Elise thought about Sandra, who had called her that morning to say she was speaking to a lawyer and would cooperate with anything the prosecution needed. About Cecilia, who had texted her a single line the night before, whatever comes next, we face it together. About the nursing textbook open on her kitchen table. The pages she'd been reading before Aria called, the work she was doing toward the life she was still building. Feel like it's not over, Elise said. It's not even close. It's going in the right direction, Aria said. Finally, yes. That evening, Elise Morgan sat in her Atlanta apartment with the city moving outside her window and the textbook still open on the table. She thought about the 20 years of her life. Not with grief, she had done some of that privately in the weeks after the DNA match, and she had filed it where it belonged and moved forward. But with a kind of clear-eyed inventory, the skinned knees, the school plays, the kitchen table homework sessions, Sandra's terrible chicken casserole that Elise had eaten every Sunday for 18 years. Sandra's excellent, unconditional hugs, every ordinary landmark of a life that had been genuinely, truly, unequivocally hers. She thought about Cecilia Whitmore, who had planted gardenias 20 years ago for a baby she thought was gone, and was going to replant them every year until she ran out of garden. She thought about Aria, who had sent a message to a stranger in the middle of the night, because the data was pointing somewhere that demanded following, and Aria Whitmore was constitutionally incapable of not following data. She thought about a 40-acre parcel of land in rural South Carolina and a woman named Clara Mee Jessup who had gone to court in 1971 and been told, essentially, to let it rest. And about Clara Mee's granddaughter Patricia, who had not let it rest, who had been carrying her own 20 years, more than 20, 40, 50 years of her family's story, and who was now sitting across a table from a Whitmore for the first time in history and being heard. Elise thought about all of this. Then she picked up her phone. She called Aria. Hey, Aria said. Hey, said Elise. A pause, just a breath, just long enough to mean something. You want to FaceTime, Mum? The word landed the way it was always going to land, like something that had existed before it was said and was only now finding its way into the air. Aria didn't speak for a moment, not because she didn't have an answer. Because the answer was sitting in her throat in a way that needed a second to settle. Yeah, she said finally. Her voice did something quiet and unguarded that she would have hidden from anyone else. Yeah, she'd really love that. Elise smiled. She opened the app. She pressed the name. 3 rings. Cecilia picked up. The Whitmore house had become, in the weeks after the charges were filed, something between a home and a war room. Marcus Webb was there 3 days a week. Ray Fordham called in updates on a secure line every Tuesday. D.A. Grave had met with Carter and Cecilia twice, walking them through the prosecution's case and being honest about the defense's probable strategy. Elise had moved into the guest suite, not permanently. She still had her apartment in Atlanta, still had her classes, still had the life she had been building before any of this. But she had taken a 2-month leave from the clinic, and she was here, and the effect of her presence on the house was one of those things that was felt by everyone and described by no one. It was like a room that had been running slightly too cold for 20 years had finally been brought to the right temperature. She leaves her cups on the counter, Aria announced from the kitchen island one morning in the tone of someone lodging an important formal complaint. So do you, Cecilia said, without looking up from the document she was reading. I'm the original daughter. I have tenure. Elise appeared from the hallway, heard this, poured herself a coffee, and left her cup on the exact section of counter Aria had just gestured toward. Aria stared at her. Elise raised her eyebrows pleasantly. Cecilia turned a page of her document and said nothing, but the corner of her mouth quirked. That was the Whitmore house 4 weeks before trial, tense and full of lawyers, and also somehow more alive than it had been in 20 years. Carter's mother arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning. Elena Whitmore was 72, immaculate, and had the bearing of a woman who had never in her life arrived anywhere other than exactly on her own terms. She was wearing a grey wool coat despite the April warmth because Elena Whitmore dressed for occasions, and this was an occasion. She stood in the front hall with her leather handbag over one arm and looked around the house she had visited for 40 years as if she was seeing it newly. Carter came downstairs and stopped when he saw her. "Mother, Carter," she looked at him for a moment. "I need to speak with you and with Cecilia and with the young woman." Carter was quiet. "Her name is Elise," he said. "I know what her name is," Elena said. Cecilia appeared at the top of the stairs. She looked at Elena. Then she came down. They sat in the living room, Carter and Cecilia on one sofa. Elena in the armchair she had always claimed on her visits, back straight, handbag on her lap. Elise came in last, called from the garden by Aria, who had delivered the news of Elena's arrival with the specific expression of someone handing over a live grenade with great care. Elena looked at Elise. Elise looked at Elena, a long silence. Elena's face did something complicated that she controlled quickly, but not quickly enough. The jaw, the eyes, the specific architecture of the face. "You look like your father," Elena said, "and like your mother both at once." "I'm told that's common with twins," Elise said. The corner of Elena's mouth moved, just slightly. Then Elena looked at Carter and Cecilia and said, "I owe you both an apology." Room went very quiet. "I knew about your grandfather's box," Elena said. "Not its full contents. Your grandfather was careful about what he shared. But I knew there were things in it that were better left unread. And I asked you to destroy it because I was protecting the family name. That was a mistake." She paused. "It was a mistake I made because I was afraid of what the truth would cost this family. And I have spent my life watching what happens when people make choices out of fear instead of right." Carter said, "Mother, me finish." Her voice was firm and something in it was tired. "Your grandfather made choices I could not undo. I chose to protect those choices instead of confronting them. That is my portion of this." She looked at Elise. "This young woman was robbed of her family, a family I am part of, and Patricia Jessup's grandmother was robbed of what was hers. And both of those things happened because Whitmore men decided that what was convenient was more important than what was right." She put the handbag on the coffee table. She opened it and took out an envelope. "This is a letter I have written to Patricia Jessup," she said. "I am sending it today with your knowledge. It is an acknowledgement from me, as Harrison's daughter-in-law, as the person who asked for that box to be burned, that I understand what her family is owed, and that I support Carter's commitment to addressing it." She set the envelope on the table. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Elise said quietly, "Why are you doing this now?" Elena looked at her. "Because I am 72 years old," she said, "and I have been watching this family carry things it should have put down a long time ago. I am tired of watching us carry them." Another silence. Then Cecilia said, "Thank you, Elena." And those were the most significant words these two women had exchanged in 40 years of knowing each other. The week before trial, Cecilia Whitmore did 3 things. The first, she called Dr. Rachel Calloway, not to threaten, not to express what she felt. She had decided what she felt about Calloway a long time ago and made peace with the complexity of it. She called to say, in the precise language of someone who has decided exactly what they want, that she expected Calloway to stand by her cooperation agreement and testify fully and truthfully. "I will," Dr. Calloway said. Her voice was smaller than Cecilia remembered from the delivery room. "A lot smaller. I am going to tell everything, every single thing." "Good," Cecilia said. "That's all I need." She hung up. The second thing, she went to the grave alone. Carter offered. Aria offered. Elise, with the specific brave quietness of someone who understood the weight of the gesture, offered. Cecilia declined all of them and went alone. The cemetery was quiet on a weekday morning. The stone was small and white, with Elise Grace Whitmore and a single date below the name. One date because she had not lived long enough for 2, or so anyone believed, for 20 years. Cecilia stood in front of it for a long time. She did not cry. She had cried so much in the preceding months that the crying had reorganized itself into something quieter. She said out loud to no one and to everyone, "She's alive. She's remarkable. And the people who did this are going to answer for it. All of them." Then she said something else, something private. Something that was between her and the stone and the memory of what she had lost and found and the 20 Octobers between them. Then she walked back to her car. The third thing, she called her mother. It starts Monday, Cecilia said. I know. Gloria said, I'll be there. You don't have to, Cecilia Janine Tate. Full name, unambiguous. I will be in that courtroom every single day. I will sit behind my child and I will be the loudest person in that room when the verdict comes in if the Lord allows it. I have been waiting 20 years for someone to answer for this. Okay, Mama, I'm bringing your Aunt Renee. Lord, the Lord is exactly right. Trial of Diane Prescott opened on a Monday morning in Charleston County Court. The gallery was full. Press in the back rows. Cameras on the courthouse steps. The Whitmore family on the left side of the gallery. Carter, Cecilia, Aria, Elise, Gloria, Aunt Renee, who had worn her most significant earrings because she had known they would be on camera, Marcus, and 4 additional family members who had driven from Atlanta without being invited because the Tate family showed up for its own. Diane Prescott sat at the defense table with her attorney Gregory Fain. Fain was expensive and polished and known in legal circles for 2 things: technical precision and a willingness to make witnesses deeply uncomfortable. Diane's expression was composed. The composed smile, the same one from the professional headshot, the same one she had maintained through the weeks of press coverage and public scrutiny. Cecilia looked at the smile from across the courtroom. It did not reach Diane's eyes. It never had. Dr. A. Pamela Grave made the opening statement. She was not theatrical. She had been doing this for 35 years, and she knew that the truth, stated plainly, lands harder than drama. She said, a woman had been wronged by a man she loved. And instead of grieving that, instead of going through the human, difficult, painful process of a broken relationship, she had chosen to use her intelligence, her resources, and the complicity she had purchased from 2 hospital employees to remove a newborn baby from her family and allow 2 parents to spend 20 years grieving for a loss that never happened. Defendant will tell you she was a wronged woman, Dear Grave said. She may well have been. That is not on trial here. What is on trial is what she chose to do with that wrongness. A woman who has been hurt has choices. Diane Prescott made hers. She looked at the gallery. There is a 20-year-old woman sitting in this courtroom today who did not know her own name until 5 months ago. First 2 days were technical. A forensic document examiner confirmed that the signatures on the hospital paperwork were genuine, Dr. Rachel Calloway's actual signature, not a forgery. This established the direct link between Diane's plan and the hospital documentation. A financial investigator walked the jury through the money trail. Prescott Consulting LLC, the shell structure, the deposits, the timing. Beverly Holt's Savannah House, purchased 14 months after the events of October 14, 2004. The financial thread was clean and tight. Gregory Fain cross-examined aggressively. He challenged the chain of custody. He questioned the forensic methodology. He pointed to possible alternative explanations for the financial connection between his client and Beverly Holt. He was good at all of this, but the documentation was very clean. Fain was chipping at the edges of something solid. On day 3, Beverly Holt took the stand. She had been a confident woman once, 12 years of nursing, no disciplinary record, a person her colleagues had relied on. She sat in the witness chair looking like someone who had not slept properly in a year. Christine Weiss, the assistant DA, questioned her with methodical care. Beverly confirmed it all. She had been on duty the night of October 14, 2004. She had been approached by Diane Prescott 6 weeks prior. She had been told the arrangement was legal, that both parents had consented, that this was a private matter requiring discretion. Much were you paid? Christine asked. $300,000, Beverly said. A murmur moved through the gallery. And on the night of October 14th, what did you do? Beverly pressed her lips together. Her hands were folded on the rail. I manipulated the monitoring readings on the second baby. I created a false vitals concern. I had a colleague step away, and I took the baby to a separate room. The baby was alive. She was completely healthy. She was small, but she was breathing and healthy, while her parents were being told she had died. She was in a storage room off the maternity ward, Beverly said, in a bassinet. I went in every 30 minutes to check on her. She was crying sometimes. I kept her calm and as quiet as possible. Gallery was completely silent. In the second row, Elise sat very still. Aria's hand found hers under the armrest. Elise held on without looking away from the witness stand. Beverly Holt looked at the jury. I told a healthy baby it was going to be okay, she said. While her mother was being told she was dead, I have to live with that. Gregory Fain's cross-examination was efficient and precise. He established that Beverly had not been physically threatened, that the choice had been hers to make. that she had accepted payment. You were a nurse who accepted $300,000 and handed a newborn to a stranger, Fain said. That's what happened. Beverly's jaw tightened. That's what happened, she said quietly, and I have to live with that. It was the second time she had said it. The jury noticed the repetition. Dr. Rachel Calloway took the stand on day 5. She had a composure about her that was not confidence, but rather the specific stillness of someone who has already made their peace with what is coming and just needs to say it out loud. She walked Christine Weiss through the events clearly and fully. She testified about the buried medical board complaint from 1998, about how Diane had found it, about the meeting at the Columbia conference, about the threat laid out for her, patient and methodical, while Diane drank her coffee and waited for Calloway to do the math. She told you the family had consented, Christine said. Yes, she told me it was a private adoption arrangement, that both parents had agreed quietly, that I was providing a medical framework for something that had already been decided. Calloway paused. I chose to believe that. I chose to believe it because the alternative, that I was being asked to help steal a child, was something I could not have done knowingly, so I found the version I could live with, a breath. I have lived with it for 20 years, and it does not get easier, it gets heavier. The night of October 14th, when you told Cecilia Whitmore her daughter had not survived. I said the words, Calloway said. Her voice was flat. I said them and I watched her. She stopped. I watched her face. And I heard what she, another stop. I have heard it in my sleep since that night. I will hear it until I die. Courtroom was still. In the gallery, Cecilia Whitmore was looking at Dr. Calloway with an expression that was not forgiveness and was not hatred. It was something that had no clean word, the look of someone examining a wound and deciding what it requires. On day 6 of the trial, which nobody had expected, and which changed the energy of the entire proceeding, the second story broke. Patricia Jessup had given an interview. She had not given it to capitalize on the Whitmore trial. She had given it because a journalist covering the proceedings had found her through public court records from 1971 and asked if she wanted to speak. And Patricia Jessup, who had been carrying her grandmother's story for 50 years, had decided that if the Whitmore name was going to be in every newspaper in the country, then Clara Mee Jessup's name deserved to be there too. The story ran in the Washington Post. It laid out the 1971 civil suit, Clara Mee Jessup's original claim, the sealed settlement. The letters, including Harrison Whitmore's 1970 letter to Robert Jessup with the line about the arrangement never being formalized in a manner that would hold in any court of law. The story did not attempt to link the two scandals directly, but it did not have to. The name Whitmore now carried two stories of powerful people deciding that what was convenient was more important than what was right. The public understood immediately what that meant. The reaction was significant. Trial continued, day 8. Elise Morgan Whitmore took the stand. She was composed and wearing a dark green dress that Cecilia had not suggested but had noticed immediately. It was the exact shade of green Cecilia wore to every significant occasion. She sat in the witness chair. She looked at the jury. She had been studying their faces for a week. Christine Weiss walked her through her life methodically. Childhood, education, the DNA kit, the match, the call with Aria, Sandra, the folder. Whitmore House. Elise answered everything with the directness of a woman who has decided that the only version of this story worth telling is the complete one. Elise, Christine said, the defense will suggest that your life was good, that you lacked nothing, that you were loved. Is that true? Partially true, Elise said. My mom, Sandra, loved me. I had a stable, healthy childhood. I am not here to frame my life as a tragedy. It wasn't a tragedy. But I grew up not knowing my own name. She said it simply, without drama. Not the name I was given, the name I was supposed to have. I grew up not knowing my parents, not knowing I had a sister, not knowing where I came from or why. There was always a part of my history that felt like a room I couldn't enter. She paused. Those are not small things. Those are the foundational things. Most people get to have those answered without ever asking. I didn't know I was asking until I was 20 years old, and a DNA test gave me an answer I hadn't known I needed. Do you feel you were harmed? Christine asked. Elise said, even though you were loved, even though your life was, by external measures, a good one. Both things can be true, Elise said. Being loved inside a lie and being harmed by the lie are not mutually exclusive. Sandra's love for me was real. The harm done to my family was real. The 20 years my mother stood at a grave for a daughter who was alive and making cereal for dinner in Atlanta, that was real. All of it is real, and none of it cancels any other part. In the gallery, Cecilia pressed 2 fingers briefly to her lips. Carter did not blink. Gloria, in the row behind, was gripping Aunt Renee's hand so hard that Aunt Renee would later mention it in detail. Gregory Fane stood up. He knew how to approach a witness who had just delivered a compelling answer. You don't contest the emotion. You reframe the agency. He walked Elise through her stable childhood, her nursing career, her built life. Then my client has never met you. She has no personal relationship with you. Whatever her motivations in 2004, she should take the stand and explain them, Elise said. Excuse me. If the defense wants to explain Diane Prescott's motivations in 2004, she should take the stand and explain them herself. I'd be very interested to hear it. Elise looked at Fane steadily. I think the jury would be too. Fane recalibrates. I'm not here to litigate whether my client testifies. I know, Elise said. I'm just observing that the one person who actually knows what happened in 2004 is sitting 12 feet away and hasn't said a word since this trial began. Fane looked at her. He sat down. It was the right call. Every additional question was going to go the same direction. Christine Weiss, at the prosecution table, was looking at her notepad with the focused expression of someone working very hard not to smile. Diane Prescott did not take the stand. Gregory Fane had made this decision before the trial began, and nothing that happened over 8 days of testimony had given him reason to change it. Beverly Holt had been too credible. Calloway had been too credible. And Elise had been devastating in the quiet, unperformative way that is more devastating than any amount of drama. The defense case was careful and limited. 2 character witnesses. An expert challenging the financial forensic methodology. A presentation of the facts framed to support the narrative of a woman who had acted on what she believed was a consensual arrangement. It was not nothing. Fane was too good for it to be nothing. But there was a problem. The jury had been watching Diane's face for 8 days. During Elise's testimony, specifically the line about growing up not knowing her own name, something had moved across Diane's face. A small thing, a flicker, less than 2 seconds. It was not remorse. It was calculation. The specific expression of someone who is still, even now, assessing their options, still running numbers, still looking for the angle. 2 jurors noticed it. They would mention it afterward. On the morning of closing arguments, Gregory Fane made a request that surprised everyone in the room, including, based on her expression, Dia Grave. He asked the judge for permission to enter document into evidence. A personal letter written by Diane Prescott addressed to the Whitmore family. Not a legal document, not a strategic maneuver. A letter that Diane had written 3 weeks into the trial and given to Fane with instructions to enter it into the record regardless of outcome. The judge reviewed it, allowed it, read portions of it aloud. The gallery was completely silent. The letter was not an apology. It was not a confession. It was something stranger and more honest than either. Diane Prescott had written, in careful, even handwriting, about the night Carter ended the affair. About what she had felt sitting in his office. Not the anger, everyone had assumed the anger, but the grief. The specific grief of a woman who had convinced herself she was loved and found out she was mistaken and had not known what to do with that discovery except reach for the worst version of herself. She wrote, I spent 20 years telling myself what I did was proportional, that I had been hurt and I had responded. I understand now that I did not respond to my hurt. I responded to my powerlessness, and I inflicted that powerlessness on a child who had done nothing, on a family that was not my enemy. I do not ask for forgiveness. I ask only that the record reflect that I know what I did. I knew it when I did it. I chose to do it anyway. The choice was mine. The courtroom was so quiet that the ventilation system was audible. Cecilia read the letter. The judge had distributed copies to the family, and her face went through something that nobody in that gallery had ever seen on Cecilia Whitmore's face before. Not grief, not anger, something that looked like the end of a very long wait. She sat with that for a long moment. The letter folded in her lap. Her posture is immaculate. Her eyes somewhere far away and then slowly back in the room. Carter, beside her, looked at the letter in his own hands. He read it through once more. Then he placed it face down on the bench. What Diane had written cost her something to write. You could feel it in the precision of every sentence, the way a person writes when they are done performing and have nothing left to protect. It was 20 years too late. It was also, in its strange and limited way, the most honest thing she had ever done. Both of those things were true. They would remain true for a long time. Dia Pamela Grave delivered her closing argument without theatrics and without hesitation. Said, A woman had made a choice. She had acknowledged the choice in writing in this courtroom. The fact that she had also been hurt did not make the choice less of a choice. The fact that she had written a letter acknowledging it did not undo 20 years of living inside it. Diane Prescott told you in her own letter that she knew what she was doing, Diagrave said. She said it clearly. She said she chose it. There is very little left for this jury to decide except whether to take her at her word. I suggest you do. Gregory Fane's closing argument was his best work of the trial. He acknowledged the letter honestly. He argued that the legal question before the jury was not whether Diane Prescott regretted her actions, but whether the prosecution had met its burden on each specific charge. He was technically correct. The jury was not moved by technical correctness. They had Diane's own words in their hands. The jury deliberated for 2 days and 7 hours. The Whitmore family occupied a hotel suite near the courthouse. Nobody ate anything properly. Carter watched financial news on mute. Gloria and Aunt Renee played cards at the corner table with the focused energy of 2 women doing something with their hands so that their hands do not do something else. Aria and Elise sat on the sofa rewatching a show they had independently loved for years and discovered they both loved in the first week of knowing each other. Neither of them was watching it. They were both just glad to have something to look at that was not the clock. Cecilia sat by the window. She thought about Clara Mee Jessup, who had sat in a different kind of waiting room 50 years ago. She thought about Patricia Jessup, watching the same news crawl from Atlanta. She thought about Elise. About the letter, about a woman somewhere in this city who had spent 20 years as the architect of a perfect concealment and had then, in the strangest and most human of moves, decided to write down the truth and hand it to a judge. On the second afternoon, Elise fell asleep on the sofa. Aria put a blanket over her. Cecilia watched this from the window. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, jury's back. They filed back into the courtroom. Full gallery, press. The Whitmore family in their row. Gloria and Aunt Renee, who had indeed been there every single day. Diane Prescott at the defense table. Diane's composure was there, but it was thinner than it had been on day one. The letter had cost her something. You could see it. The jury foreperson stood, guilty. She read through all 6 state charges. On each one the same word. The federal proceedings would be separate, but the state verdict was this: 6 counts. Guilty on all 6. Gloria made a sound. Carter exhaled, long, slow, 20 years in that exhale. Aria grabbed Elise's hand. Elise held on. Her face was very still and very open and full of something that was not triumph, and was not relief, and was not grief. It was something that lives in the specific place between all 3, the exact feeling of a truth that has been denied for 20 years being given its correct name, out loud, in public, by 12 strangers who had no reason to lie. Cecilia did not make a sound. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight and her face composed, and she looked at Diane Prescott across the courtroom. Diane was looking down at the table. The composed smile was gone. The sentencing came 6 weeks later. Dr. Rachel Calloway, suspended sentence, permanent revocation of her medical license, supervised probation. She delivered a public apology in court, in her own voice, looking directly at Cecilia Whitmore. It was not a performed apology. It was the apology of a woman who had spent 20 years rehearsing it without knowing she was. Cecilia looked at her. She did not nod. She did not look away. Beverly Holt, 3 years with parole eligibility at 18 months. The Savannah house was seized. Restitution ordered. Diane Prescott, 11 years on the state charges. The federal wire fraud proceedings would add to this. And here is the loss, the one that does not fully heal, because on the day of sentencing, there was a moment. A quiet one, easy to miss if you were not watching. Carter looked at Elise, and Elise looked back. And what passed between them in that look was this: 20 years. 20 years of birthdays Carter had not known to celebrate, of school performances he had not sat in the audience of the first day of high school and the nursing school applications, and the small daily accumulations of a life that he had been present for none of, not through any failing of love, but through the deliberate act of another person. The verdict could not give those years back. No verdict ever could. Elise reached over and put her hand on his arm. He covered it with his own. That was the moment. The small, private, unhealable moment. Justice served, something still lost. Both true. 2 weeks after sentencing, Carter and Patricia Jessup reached a formal agreement. Marcus Webb brokered it. The terms were sealed at Patricia's request. She had no interest in a public moment. She wanted what her grandmother had been owed and had not received. Carter agreed to a settlement that reflected the current value of the land's partial ownership stake, plus 5 decades of generated revenue. It was a significant sum. It was also, by any honest measure, the correct sum. Elena Whitmore contributed a personal amount separate from the firm's settlement. She did not announce this. Patricia Jessup, when she called Marcus to confirm receipt, said only, "Tell the family I accept this, and tell them my grandmother would have told them it was the right thing, not enough, but right." Marcus relayed this to Carter. "Not enough," Carter repeated her words. Marcus said, "She's right," Carter said. "It's not, but it's what we can do now, and we're going to keep doing it." He was talking about more than the money. Marcus knew that 3 months after sentencing, Elise arranged a lunch. She called Cecilia and said, "I want to have lunch with you and Sandra, together, if you're willing." A pause. "Where?" Cecilia asked. "Somewhere neutral. Somewhere that doesn't belong to either of you." They went to a restaurant in Columbia, halfway between Charleston and Atlanta. A table by the window. 3 women who had no comfortable category for what they were to each other. It was, by any objective measure, a deeply complicated 3 hours. Sandra spoke about Elise's childhood in specific, honest terms, not performing for Cecilia's approval, not editing the story to make herself look better. She talked about the kitchen table homework sessions, the cooking made with great love and no skill, the nursing school applications she had helped research. Then she stopped and said, "I gave her everything I had. I know I had no right to her. I know that. I gave her everything I had." Cecilia looked at Sandra for a long moment. "I know you did," Cecilia said. "I can see it in who she is." That was the most Cecilia offered. It was not a lot. It was also more than anyone who understood the full weight of the situation had a right to expect. Sandra nodded. She understood the terms. Elise looked at both of them across the table and felt something she had not expected to feel, not torn. She had expected to feel torn. She did not. She felt whole, complicated and whole, which is, it turns out, the same as whole. 6 months after the verdict, Elise Morgan went to a courthouse in Atlanta and legally changed her name. Not a replacement, an addition. She became Elise Morgan Whitmore. She kept Morgan because Sandra had given it to her, and it was hers. She added Whitmore because it was also hers, and she was not going to let anyone's choices about who she should be take either part of her name from her. Both names, both histories, both mothers in their different and complicated ways. All of it held at once. Cecilia arranged a dinner. Not a party, a dinner. Family. Marcus, who had become something between a lawyer and a fixture. Brianna, who drove from Columbia because she was constitutionally incapable of missing any significant Whitmore event, and because she had, by any honest accounting, started the entire chain of events by putting a DNA kit in front of Aria on her birthday. Kind of the hero of this story, Elise had told Brianna once. "I know," Brianna had said, with enormous satisfaction. At the table, over food that Carter had enthusiastically overcooked in the way he always overcooks things when he is trying to make them special, Gloria stood and raised her glass. "To my granddaughter," Gloria said. "Both of them. Finally, both of them." Aunt Renee said something supportive and loud. Multiple things. Aria caught Elise's eye across the table. Elise smiled. She looked around at this loud, warm, imperfect, completely real group of people who were hers, who she was still learning, who she would spend years continuing to learn, and she felt something settle in her chest that she recognized immediately as the thing that had always been slightly missing. Not happiness. She had always been capable of happiness. Place. The sense of being exactly where you belong, 20 years late. Arrived in the best way possible, on her own terms, with her whole name, intact and complete and ready. That night, after everyone had gone, Carter and Cecilia sat in the back garden. The gardenias were blooming. The ones Cecilia had replanted the week before Aria came home. They had come in late but full, white against the green of the fence, exactly as intended. They sat without talking for a while. They had been married long enough to know the difference between a silence that needs to be filled and a silence that is the conversation. "Been thinking," Carter said, "about my grandfather, about Diane, about the choices people make when they're afraid of losing something." He looked at the gardenias. "My grandfather was afraid of losing what he'd built. Diane was afraid of losing what she thought she had. Both of them hurt people to protect something that turned out to be less important than the people they hurt." Cecilia was quiet. "And you?" she asked. "I was afraid too," he said. "After we thought Elise died, I was afraid of my own grief and I buried it in work and in choices I should not have made and almost pushed you away in the process." "I know," Cecilia said. "I'm not saying it to relitigate it. I'm saying it because I think courage is what separates the people in this story who did right from the people who didn't. Not intelligence, not resources, just the courage to face the thing instead of finding a way around it. Cecilia considered this. You faced it, she said. Eventually, later than I should have. She didn't soften it. That was one of the things he had always loved about her. But you did it, he looked at her. I love you, I have always loved you. Even when I was making choices that didn't show it. I know, she said, that was never the part in question. He laughed softly. She leaned her head back and looked at the night sky. She's starting the nursing program in the fall, Cecilia said. In Charleston, I know, she told me. She's looking at apartments. I offered the house. She said no. Of course she said no, she's too independent. Said with the specific combination of pride and exasperation that is the emotional signature of parenting someone who turned out exactly as you hoped. She gets that from me. Carter said nothing. Don't, Cecilia warned. I didn't say anything. You were thinking it loudly. He smiled. He took her hand. The garden was quiet. The gardenias were white in the dark. Here is the thing nobody expected. 3 weeks after the dinner, after the name change, after the gardenia, Cecilia received a letter. It was handwritten. The return address was a correctional facility in South Carolina. The handwriting was careful and even. It was from Diane Prescott, not the letter that had been read in court, that had been entered into evidence. This was different, a private letter, addressed only to Cecilia, no copies, no attorney's fingerprints on it. Just Diane writing to the woman whose life she had most profoundly broken in what appeared to be a genuine and entirely unexpected act of full disclosure. Cecilia read it alone, twice. She sat at the kitchen table in the specific quiet of someone who has just received something they were not prepared for and is deciding, before they react, exactly what they feel. Then she called Carter into the kitchen and handed it to him without a word. Carter read it. He sat down. What Diane had written was this. She had not acted alone in one additional sense that had not come out at trial. There had been a fourth person, not Beverly Holt, not Calloway, someone else. A hospital administrator who had noticed a discrepancy in the records 2 days after the birth and had been quietly paid, not by Diane, but by Philip Drew, the medical board contact who had helped bury Calloway's 1998 complaint, to ignore it. Philip Drew had known from the beginning because Calloway had called him in a panic the night of October 14th and told him what she had done. And Philip Drew, who had already helped bury one Calloway problem, had helped bury this one too. Philip Drew was 70 years old, retired for 8 years. He had appeared at the edges of the story, referenced in Calloway's testimony as the man who buried her 1998 complaint, but had never been examined as a participant in the events of October 14th itself. He had not been, until now. Cecilia sat at the kitchen table for a long time after Carter finished reading. Do we take this to Marcus? Carter asked. Cecilia was quiet. She thought about Diane, sitting in a facility somewhere in South Carolina, writing this letter. She had nothing left to gain from writing it. The trial was over. The verdict was over. She had already lost everything she was going to lose, and she had still written it. It was the most honest thing Diane Prescott had ever done. It was also 20 years too late. Both of those things were true. Yes, Cecilia said finally. We take it to Marcus. She stood up. She straightened her posture the way she always did when she was about to do something that needed to be done. Because Philip Drew, she said, does not get to retire quietly. Philip Drew was formally charged 8 months after Diane's letter reached the DA's office. The investigation was quiet and thorough, and took longer than it should have because he was 70 and retired, and the machinery of justice moves at its own pace regardless of how long people have been waiting. He eventually entered a guilty plea. He was sentenced to probation, a fine, and a public acknowledgement, the last of which cost him the most, because Philip Drew was a man who had spent his entire career operating in the part of the world that runs on reputation. He had buried 2 things for Rachel Calloway. He had lived inside that knowledge for 26 years and called it nothing. Now the record said otherwise. Now the record would always say otherwise. Elise Morgan Whitmore started her nursing program at the Medical University of South Carolina that August. She rented an apartment in Charleston, small, tidy, with a window that looked out onto a street with old oak trees and Spanish moss. She put a plant on the windowsill, a gardenia. Aria called her almost every day. Cecilia called less often but longer. The calls went for hours, the two of them talking with the focused efficiency of people who have a lot of catching up to do and are genuinely committed to doing it. Carter sent voice notes. He was bad at texting, so he recorded himself talking, about things he was reading, things that happened at the firm, things that made him think of her, small things, the accumulated currency of a father learning to be present. Elise listened to all of them. She sent back one-line texts. He screenshotted every single one. He had not told anyone. Cecilia absolutely knew. Patricia Jessup used a portion of her settlement to establish a scholarship at a South Carolina university in her grandmother Clara Mee's name. Carter's firm matched the endowment and did not make a press release about it. It was the right amount of quiet. Elena Whitmore came to Elise's first day of nursing school, uninvited. She stood at the back of a group of parents outside the building, small and upright in a gray coat despite the August heat, and watched her granddaughter walk through the doors. Nobody knew she was there except Carter, who saw her from the parking lot. He didn't say anything. He just walked over and stood beside her and watched with her. They stood there for a minute, maybe two, then Elena said quietly, "She walks like your father." Carter looked at her. "She walks like herself," he said. Elena was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "she does." They walked back to their cars. The morning was warm. The oaks overhead were old and unmoved, draped in Spanish moss the way they had been for 100 years before any of this and would be for 100 years after. Sometimes stories like this one get called impossible. Too much, too dramatic, too layered. Things like this don't actually happen, but here is what does actually happen. Secrets grow. They don't shrink with time, they grow, because the people keeping them have to grow around them, have to make more and more of their lives bend to accommodate the shape of the thing being hidden. Eventually, the shape of the secret becomes the shape of the person. And when it comes out, and it comes out, it always comes out. The person and the secret are so tangled together that you can't separate what they did from who they became. The gardenias bloomed. The scholarship was endowed. The name was changed and kept and carried forward. The storage box was opened. The letters were read. The verdict was given. And Elise Morgan Whitmore sat in a small Charleston apartment with a gardenia on her windowsill and a nursing textbook open on her table and the city of her parents moving quietly outside her window. And she was, in every way that mattered, exactly where she belonged. And if you are yet to subscribe to the channel, please do. And hit that notification bell to be the first one to know when a new story drops. See you in the next video.